They killed his family. They left him bleeding in the gutter, thinking he was dead too. Big mistake. The biggest mistake. Because what crawled out of that alley 5 years later? He became the scariest son of a bitch in Japan. Villains are praying. Heroes are sweating. The skull doesn't stop.
Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
The pipe wrench came down one more time. Not because it needed to, because Izuku Midoriya wanted the man to understand something before the end. The warehouse smelled like rust and piss and copper. A single bulb swung from a chain above them, throwing shadows across the concrete floor like the whole room was breathing. The man in the chair, Goto Shibata, mid-level enforcer for the Shiha Saikai's Western supply chain, had stopped looking like a person about 40 minutes ago. His kneecaps were pulp. His left eye had swollen shut. 3 of his teeth sat in a small puddle of blood between his shoes. His wrists were zip-tied so tight to the arms of the chair that his fingers had turned blue. He'd talked 15 minutes ago, gave up the warehouse address in Camino Ward, gave up the shipment schedule, gave up the name of the trigger supplier running product through Hosu City's port district. He gave up everything he had because Izuku Midoriya had already taken everything else. But now Goto was screaming again. Not words, just sound. The raw, animal sound of a man who understood, truly understood, that the person standing over him did not operate on the same rules as the rest of the world. No, I told you everything. Please, please. I have kids, man. Izuku set the wrench down on the table beside him. Slowly, the metal scraped against the surface. He picked up the 1911 pistol that had been sitting there the whole time, waiting, patient. He checked the chamber. 1 round. He'd loaded it that way on purpose. 1 was all he ever needed. Goto's whole body thrashed against the chair. The legs scraped against concrete. Snot and blood ran down his chin. His one good eye was wide, white, the pupil a pinprick of pure terror. No. Wait. Izuku looked at him, really looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, not with anything. His green eyes were flat, empty, like someone had pulled the plug on whatever made a person human and just left the machine running. He raised the gun. God isn't here today, asshole. Bang! The sound bounced off the warehouse walls and died in the dark. Goto's head snapped back. The chair tipped, hit the floor. The blood painted the wall behind him in a pattern that looked almost like wings. Izuku stood there for 3 seconds, staring, not at Goto, at something else, something only he could see. Then he tucked the 1911 into his waistband, pulled his trench coat tighter over the black tactical vest, the one with the white skull across the chest, and walked out through the side door. Outside, Musutafu was asleep. 2 in the morning. The air was cold and wet. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. He didn't look back. He never looked back. Let me tell you about Izuku Midoriya. Not the version you know. Not the crying kid with stars in his eyes and a notebook full of hero analysis. Not the boy who stood in front of All Might and asked if someone without a quirk could still be a hero. That kid existed once. He had a laugh that could fill up a room and a heart so big it was almost stupid. He loved Katsudon. He loved his mom's humming when she cooked. He loved heroes, genuinely, completely, the way only a child can love something they believe in with their entire chest. That kid is dead. What replaced him is something the hero world has never seen before and never wants to see again. A quirkless human being who turned himself into the most dangerous thing walking the streets of Japan. No super strength, no energy blasts, no mutation, just training, pain, fury, and enough firepower to level a city block. The underground calls him the Punisher. The heroes call him a menace. The villains don't call him anything because most of them don't live long enough to talk about him. And it all started with a family dinner. Izuku was 10 years old when his father came home. Hisashi Midoriya had been overseas for as long as Izuku could remember. Some kind of business job. That's what his mother always said. Inko would smile when she said it, but the smile never quite reached her eyes. Izuku noticed. He always noticed things. That was his real talent. This even before everything went wrong. He watched people. He studied them. He filed away the details the way other kids collected trading cards. But Hisashi came home, walked through the front door of their apartment on an evening in October with a suitcase and a tired grin and two arms that scooped Izuku off the floor like he weighed nothing. "I'm back, kid. For good this time," Inko cried. The happy kind. Izuku cried too, because that's who he was back then. A crier. He cried when he was sad, cried when he was happy, cried when he saw a hero save someone on TV. He had enough tears for the whole world. They went out for dinner that night, a family dinner. The first real one Izuku could remember. Hisashi said he knew a place in the Naruhata district, a little ramen shop with handmade noodles and pork broth that tasted like it had been simmering since the Meiji era. Inko put on the blue dress she only wore for special occasions. Izuku wore his All Might t-shirt, the good one, without the stain on the sleeve. They took the train. They talked. Hisashi told Izuku about the places he'd been. Europe, America, parts of Asia where the quirk population ratios were completely different. Izuku asked 100 questions. Hisashi answered every single one. Inko sat between them, holding both their hands, and for 36 minutes on a commuter train in Musutafu, everything was perfect. The ramen shop was on a side street in the east end of Naruhata. The district had a reputation. It sat right on the border between the commercial zone and what locals quietly called the gray area, a stretch of blocks where hero patrols thinned out and the kind of business that didn't want attention went about its work. But the ramen shop was good and the neighborhood was fine as long as you stuck to the main roads, and Hisashi had been there a dozen times. They ate. Izuku had the miso with extra egg. Hisashi had the tonkatsu. Inko had the shoyu and laughed when Izuku got broth on his chin. They stayed for almost 2 hours. The owner gave Izuku a free mochi because he said the kid had a good smile. They left at 9:47 p.m. At 9:52 p.m., 3 blocks from the train station, the Naruhata district turned into a war zone. It happened fast. That's what the news reports said later, that it happened fast. 2 rival organizations had been circling each other for months. On one side, a villain syndicate running Trigger out of the port. On the other, a Yakuza faction trying to reclaim territory the old families had lost during the rise of quirk-based crime. The tension had been building. That night, it snapped. The first explosion blew out the windows of every building on the block. Izuku felt the heat before he heard the sound, a wall of air that picked him up and threw him sideways into a parked car. His ears rang, his vision blurred, he tasted blood. He could hear screaming, a lot of screaming, people running, car alarms, more explosions. And then the quirk started firing, bolts of energy, arcs of flame, spikes of concrete ripping up from the street. The whole block became a kill box. Izuku remembers crawling. His hands were cut, glass everywhere. He was looking for his parents, calling for them. His voice was tiny against the noise. He found his father first. Hisashi was on his back in the middle of the street, or what was left of him. A disintegration-type quirk had caught him in the chest. Everything from his collarbones to his waist was just gone. His legs were still there. His head was still there. His eyes were open, staring at the sky, and the expression on his face was surprise. Izuku doesn't remember if he screamed. He thinks he did. He thinks the sound that came out of him didn't sound human. He found his mother 30 feet away. Inko was on fire. A flame-type quirk had hit the car she'd been thrown against, and the fuel tank had ruptured. She was burning. She was alive, and she was burning, and she was reaching for Izuku with one hand, while the other clawed at the pavement, trying to pull herself forward. Her blue dress was melting into her skin. Izuku ran to her. He tried to put out the fire with his hands. He burned his palms down to the meat, trying to smother the flames on his mother's body. She was looking at him. She was trying to say something. Her lips were moving. He leaned in. 1 batch, 2 batch, penny, and she died mid-word. The nursery rhyme she used to read him at bedtime, the one with the little rabbit who counted pennies. She'd made it up when he was 3 because he couldn't sleep. And she kept reading it every single night until he was 8 and told her he was too old for it. She never stopped humming it, though, while she cooked, while she folded laundry, while she waited for her husband to call. Izuku was still holding her when the stray bullet hit him. It grazed his skull on the left side, a quarter inch to the right, and it would have killed him. He fell forward onto his mother's body. His blood mixed with hers on the pavement. The heroes arrived 4 minutes later. 4 minutes. That's 240 seconds. That's the time it takes to boil an egg, or tie your shoes twice, or watch a boy's entire world burn to nothing. The heroes secured the area. They arrested the villains they could catch. They took statements. They gave interviews to the press. They posed for cameras. And nobody noticed the quirkless 10-year-old lying in a pool of blood on the sidewalk until a paramedic almost tripped over him. He woke up in the hospital 6 days later. The doctors said it was a miracle. The bullet had fractured his skull but missed the brain. The burns on his hands would scar but wouldn't cripple him. He was alive. They said it like he should be grateful. Izuku didn't say a word. Not to the doctors, not to the nurses, not to the police officers who came to take his statement, not to the social worker who sat beside his bed and spoke in that soft, careful voice people use when they're talking to someone they think might break. He was done talking. A caseworker placed him in a group home in the Camino ward, one of those gray, institutional buildings where the government stores the kids nobody wants to deal with. Izuku stayed for 11 days. On the 12th day, his bed was empty. His window was open. He'd left nothing behind except a single sheet of paper on his pillow. On it, in the careful handwriting of a 10-year-old boy who had grown up overnight, was a list of names. 14 names. Every villain who had been identified as a participant in the Naruhata massacre, pulled from news reports Izuku had memorized during his time in the hospital. Some of those names had checks next to them. The ones who'd been arrested, the rest were circled. What happened over the next 5 years would become the stuff of urban legend, the kind of story people told in bars at 2 a.m, or in villain hideouts when someone needed to explain why a certain district had gone quiet, or in police precinct break rooms when the conversation turned to the cases that didn't make sense. A 10-year-old kid disappeared into the underground, and the underground swallowed him whole. Izuku Midoriya did not become the Punisher overnight. That's important to understand. He wasn't born this way. He was built. Piece by piece, year by year, beating by beating, until every soft thing inside him had been burned out or beaten down or buried so deep it might as well be dead. The first year was the worst. He found the mercenaries by accident, a crew of ex-military contractors who operated out of a shipping container yard near the docks, private security types who did the kind of work that didn't show up on any government ledger. Izuku showed up at their gate at 2 a.m, bloody, starving, carrying a stolen kitchen knife, and told them he wanted to learn how to kill people. They laughed at him. They stopped laughing 6 months later when the kid they'd been training started outperforming their drills. The crew leader was a man named Takashi Sato, former JSDF Special Forces dishonorably discharged for excessive brutality during an overseas deployment. He was a hard man with hard hands and a philosophy that was simple. The world is violence, and the only people who survive it are the ones who become better at it than everyone else. He taught Izuku the fundamentals. Hand-to-hand combat, not the flashy martial arts you see in movies, but the real thing. Military combatives, how to close distance, how to control a bigger opponent, how to break a joint in 3 moves, how to use your thumb to find someone's eye socket, how to kill a man with your bare hands in under 4 seconds. Izuku learned. Fast. Terrifyingly fast. By 11, he could strip and reassemble every standard-issue firearm in the Japanese military's arsenal blindfolded. By 12, his marksmanship scores at range were competitive with active-duty Special Forces operators. By 13, he was sparring grown men twice his size and winning, because Sato had taught him the truth that every warrior eventually learns. Size doesn't matter if you're faster, meaner, and more willing to take damage than the other guy, but Sato was just the beginning. Over the next 4 years, Izuku moved through the underground like a ghost, absorbing everything he could from anyone willing to teach him. A retired Krav Maga instructor in Osaka who'd spent 20 years training Israeli counterterrorism units taught him how to fight in confined spaces, hallways, stairwells, elevators, rooms so tight you couldn't swing your arms. A black market weapons dealer in Yokohama introduced him to the world of modified firearms, custom explosives, and the kind of hardware that most people only saw in war documentaries. A Yakuza enforcer, an old man with 9 fingers and a scar that ran from his ear to his collarbone, taught him the art of interrogation. Not the Hollywood version, the real version. The one where you learn which bones cause the most pain when they break, and where to cut someone so they bleed slowly enough to keep talking for hours. Izuku studied criminal networks the way a general studies enemy territory. He mapped supply chains. He memorized patrol routes, both hero and police. He built informant networks. He cataloged every villain organization operating in Japan, from the street-level quirk gangs to the sophisticated syndicates that ran trigger production and distribution across entire regions. And through all of it, the training, the pain, the isolation, the slow dismantling of everything he used to be, one thing stayed constant. The list, 14 names. 7 had checks. 7 were circled. By the time Izuku Midoriya turned 15, only 2 names on the list remained uncircled. The police didn't connect the murders. Why would they? A gang enforcer shot dead in his apartment. A quirk-using arsonist found beaten to death in a dumpster. A mid-level drug runner who disappeared and was later found in pieces inside his own car. The killings happened in different cities, different districts, different contexts. There was no pattern, unless you had the list. Izuku was meticulous. Every kill was planned weeks in advance. Entry points, escape routes, camera blind spots, response times for the nearest hero patrols. He treated every operation like a military campaign because that's what Sato had drilled into him. Sloppiness gets you killed, and emotion gets you sloppy. By 15, the list was almost complete. But the list was never the point. The list was just the appetizer. Izuku Midoriya wasn't trying to avenge his parents. He was trying to fix the system that let them die. And the system was a lot bigger than 14 names. The skull showed up for the first time on a night in April. A villain named Gash, real name Kenji Mura, quirk Boneblade, which let him grow calcified spikes from his forearms, had been running a protection racket in the Hosu City commercial district for the better part of a year. He shook down small business owners, threatened their families, and carved up anyone who refused to pay. 3 people had been hospitalized. One, a 60-year-old woman who owned a flower shop, had lost her left hand. The heroes knew about Gash. Everyone knew about Gash, but Gash was careful. He did his work in the gaps between hero patrol shifts. He threatened his victims into silence. The one time a pro hero had confronted him, Gash had fled into the underground rail system and disappeared. The hero filed a report. The report went into a stack of other reports. Nothing happened. Izuku happened. He found Gash on a rooftop in the warehouse district eating takeout with 2 of his guys. Izuku came up the fire escape, silent, wearing the skull vest for the first time, black tactical pants, black boots, a belt loaded with magazines, a combat knife, and 2 fragmentation grenades. A Beretta 92 in a thigh holster. An M4 carbine across his back. He was 15 years old, 6 feet tall, 175 pounds of lean muscle, and his green hair was a wild mess that he'd given up trying to control years ago. Gash's 2 bodyguards were down before any of them heard the fire escape door close. 2 shots. Center mass. They dropped their food containers and hit the rooftop like sacks of concrete. Gash spun, bone blades erupting from his forearms. 3-foot spikes of calcified bone, sharp enough to punch through sheet metal. He was fast. He was a veteran street fighter who'd been using his quirk to hurt people for years. He wasn't fast enough. Izuku closed the distance in 3 strides. He ducked the first blade swing, sidestepped the second, grabbed Gash's right wrist, and snapped it at the joint. The bone blade on that arm cracked and went limp. Gash screamed. Izuku drove his knee into Gash's stomach, doubling him over, then brought his elbow down on the back of his neck. Gash hit the rooftop face first. His nose shattered. He tried to get up. Izuku stomped on his remaining bone blade forearm and ground his boot until the calcified spike snapped off at the base. Gash screamed again, a high, thin sound that didn't match his size. Izuku grabbed him by the hair, dragged him to the edge of the rooftop, and held him over the 6-story drop. The flower shop owner, Izuku said. His voice was flat. No emotion, no volume, just a statement. Sato, 60 years old, you took her hand. Gash was babbling. I'll pay. I'll fix it. You'll die. He let go. Gash fell 6 stories and hit the alley below with a sound like a watermelon dropped off a building. Izuku looked down, made sure. Then he turned and walked back across the rooftop, stepping over the 2 dead bodyguards without breaking stride. The next morning, the Hosu City Police Department found 3 bodies and a spray-painted white skull on the rooftop door. Nobody knew what it meant. Yet, within 6 months, everybody knew what it meant. The Punisher, that's what the media called him after a leaked police report used the term and it spread across social media like wildfire, became the most talked about figure in Japan's underworld, and then in Japan's overworld, and then everywhere. The body count climbed. Drug dealers, traffickers, enforcers, mid-level syndicate operators, quirk users who had been terrorizing communities for years while the hero system failed to stop them. They started turning up dead, shot, stabbed, beaten, blown up, and always, somewhere nearby, a white skull. Spray painted on a wall, carved into a table, pressed into a bullet casing left at the scene. The underground fractured. Villain organizations that had operated with impunity for years started looking over their shoulders. Safe houses were abandoned, supply routes were rerouted, low-level thugs started refusing jobs in certain districts because the skull had been spotted there. The fear was real. The fear was everywhere, and the heroes couldn't stop it. That was the part that shook the world. Not just that a vigilante was killing villains, vigilantism had existed for years, even if the system pretended it didn't. What shook people was that the Punisher was quirkless, and no one could catch him. Every major hero agency in Japan put resources toward identifying and apprehending the Punisher. Endeavor made a public statement calling him a criminal no different from the villains he claims to hunt. Hawks was more measured. He said the Punisher was dangerous, but acknowledged carefully that the targets had all been verified criminals. All Might said nothing publicly, but sources inside his agency reported that the symbol of peace had ordered his sidekicks to prioritize any intelligence that could lead to the Punisher's capture. None of it worked, because Izuku Midoriya was smarter than all of them. He didn't use a phone. He didn't leave DNA. Sato had taught him forensic countermeasures before Izuku was 12. He never hit the same district twice in a row. He moved through the city like smoke, appearing from nothing, doing his work, and vanishing before anyone could respond. The police formed a task force. The task force found nothing. Eraserhead, the underground hero, the one who worked the dark cases, came closer than anyone. He found a pattern in the killings, not geographic, not temporal, but structural. Every target was connected to a larger network. The Punisher wasn't killing randomly. He was dismantling organizations from the bottom up, cutting supply lines, removing key personnel, creating chaos and power vacuums that destabilized entire criminal hierarchies. Eraserhead presented his findings to a joint meeting of the Hero Public Safety Commission and the National Police Agency. His conclusion was blunt. We're not dealing with a vigilante. We're dealing with a one-man war, and he's winning. The room was silent for a long time after that. Now let me tell you how the Punisher crossed paths with UA High School, because that's where this story gets complicated. UA was the top hero academy in Japan, the best of the best, the brightest, most powerful quirk users in the country's incoming generation, molded into the heroes who would maintain order and protect society. It was a symbol, maybe the symbol, of the hero system that Izuku Midoriya had declared war on. He didn't care about UA. He didn't care about UA. The students were kids. The teachers were heroes who'd chosen to teach instead of patrol, which meant they'd already semi-retired from the work that mattered. UA was irrelevant to his mission, until it wasn't. The intelligence came in fragments. An informant, a low-level trigger courier Izuku had turned by breaking 3 of his ribs and promising to break the rest, mentioned a name, Shigaraki. The courier didn't know much. A young villain, powerful quirk, connected to someone even bigger, planning something. Something involving a facility called USJ. Izuku pulled the thread. It took him 2 weeks. 2 weeks of tracking, surveilling, bribing, and interrogating his way through the edges of a network he'd never encountered before. Most villain organizations in Japan were motivated by money, territory, or power. This one was different. This one had ideology. Someone at the top, someone the foot soldiers called sensei, was building an army. And the first target was, Izuku didn't care about saving UA students. Let's be clear about that. He wasn't a hero. He didn't rescue people. He eliminated threats. But Shigaraki's network was connected to trigger distribution. And trigger distribution was connected to the supply chains Izuku had been dismantling for months. And the weapon suppliers Shigaraki was using to arm his cannon fodder villains were the same people Izuku had been hunting. The trail led to USJ, so that's where he went. The Unforeseen Simulation Joint was a massive training facility on UA's campus, a dome the size of a sports stadium, divided into zones that simulated different disaster environments. Floods, fires, landslides, storms. It was where the first-year hero students learned to apply their quirks in real-world rescue scenarios. On that morning, Class 1A of UA's hero course filed into USJ for their first off-campus training exercise. 13, the space hero, was their guide. Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa, was their homeroom teacher and supervisor. 20 students, 2 pros, 1 facility. And then the portal opened. A swirling black mist erupted in the center of the main plaza, and through it poured a wave of bodies. Dozens of villains, low-level thugs and mid-tier quirk users recruited from every gutter and back alley in the city, flooding into USJ like rats from a sewer. At their head stood a thin, pale man in black with severed hands covering his body and face. Tamura Shigaraki, the self-proclaimed leader of the League of Villains, beside him the Nomu, a massive, brain-exposed bioengineered weapon designed with a singular purpose: kill All Might. Shock absorption. Super regeneration. Raw physical power that exceeded anything a normal human could produce. Shigaraki scratched his neck and looked at the students the way a kid looks at ants before he burns them with a magnifying glass. The schedule said All Might would be here, he rasped. Guess we'll just have to kill some kids to make a point. Eraserhead moved first. He told the students to stay together, activated his quirk, and launched himself into the horde. He was good. Better than good. He moved like a predator, using his binding cloth to disable and restrain villains while his erasure shut down their quirks. For 3 minutes, he was winning. Then the numbers caught up. A villain landed a hit from behind, then another. His elbow was dislocated, his goggles cracked. The Nomu grabbed his arm and slammed him into the ground so hard the concrete cratered. The sound of his bones breaking echoed through the entire facility. The students scattered. Kurogiri, the mist villain, used his warp gate to teleeyes them across USJ's different zones. Bakugo and Kirishima ended up in the collapse zone. Todoroki landed in the landslide zone. Mineta and Asue were warped to the flood zone. They were split up, surrounded, outgunned. Shigaraki stood over Eraserhead's broken body and reached down to touch his face. 5 fingers. Disintegration. The slow, spreading rot that turned living tissue to dust. I hate heroes, Shigaraki whispered. I hate everything about this world, and I'm going to watch it all crumble. His fingers were an inch from Eraserhead's cheek when the reinforced entrance doors of USJ exploded inward. Not opened, not breached. Exploded. A stolen armored tactical van, the kind riot police used, a 6-ton steel box on wheels, smashed through the doors at 60 miles per hour. It tore through the entrance frame like paper, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal flying across the plaza. It skidded sideways, tires screaming, leaving a trail of sparks across the floor, and came to a stop 30 feet from the central fountain. Every person in USJ, hero, student, villain, froze. The driver's door opened. Izuku Midoriya stepped out. He was wearing the skull vest, black tactical pants, black combat boots, a long trench coat that hung to his knees, open in the front so the white skull was visible, a belt loaded with magazines, grenades, and a combat knife the length of his forearm. An M60 general-purpose machine gun in his left hand, the belt-fed ammunition draped over his shoulder. An M4 assault rifle across his back, a Beretta 92 in a thigh holster, 2 flashbang grenades clipped to his chest rig, and his face, 15 years old, green hair, a scar that ran along the left side of his skull from a bullet that should have killed him, showed absolutely nothing. No fear. No anger. No excitement. Just a pair of green eyes that looked like the lights had gone out a long time ago and nobody had bothered coming back. He surveyed the scene. Dozens of villains, one massive bioweapon, a broken hero on the ground, Students scattered across the facility, fighting for their lives. He lifted the M60. Class is dismissed, you freaks. And then the warehouse became a slaughterhouse. The M60 opened up with a sound like God ripping a phone book in half. Belt-fed, 7.62 NATO rounds, 600 rounds per minute. Izuku swept the barrel across the villain line in a controlled arc. Center mass, center mass, center mass. He didn't aim for legs. He didn't aim for arms. He aimed where Sato had taught him to aim, the space between the nipples. The kill box. Villains dropped like dominoes. The ones in front caught the rounds and went down screaming. The ones behind them tried to run. The M60 chewed through everything. Bodies, cover, the concrete pillars they tried to hide behind. Dust and debris filled the air. The sound was deafening. A villain with a hardening quirk thought he could rush through the fire. His skin turned to stone as he charged forward, mouth open in a war cry. Izuku let him get close. Then he shifted his aim 6 inches up and put a burst directly into the villain's face. Hardening quirk or not, the human skull has weak points around the eyes and throat. The villain's face caved in and he went down mid-stride, sliding across the floor in a trail of his own blood. Another villain, emitter type, some kind of energy projection from his palms, popped out from behind a support pillar and fired a blast. Izuku sidestepped it, still firing the M60 with one arm now, the barrel barely wavering. The energy blast scorched the van behind him. Izuku's return burst caught the emitter in the chest and throat. He crumpled. 15 seconds. 20 villains. The M60 belt ran dry. Izuku dropped it. Didn't even look at it. Already had the M4 off his back and up to his shoulder in one fluid motion. Holy. Kirishima whispered from behind a column 30 meters away, where he and Bakugo had regrouped after fighting their way out of the collapse zone. "What the hell is that guy?" Bakugo didn't answer. His palms were sparking, his jaw was tight. His red eyes were locked on the figure in the skull vest, watching the way Izuku moved. Efficient, relentless, absolutely zero wasted motion. Bakugo had spent his entire life as the strongest person in any room he walked into. He'd never seen someone operate like this, like a machine that had been calibrated for violence and nothing else. "Is that a person?" Bakugo said quietly. It wasn't bravado, it was genuine confusion. Across the facility, in the flood zone, Tsuyu Asui surfaced with Mineta clinging to her back. They dealt with their villains, barely, and were making their way back to the central plaza. What they found when they got there made both of them stop dead. Bodies. Dozens of bodies. Scattered across the floor like someone had dropped them from the sky, blood pooling on the concrete, the acrid smell of gunpowder hanging in the air, and in the center of it all, a figure in a trench coat moving through the remaining villains like a wolf through sheep. "Ribbit," Asui said softly. Her usual was cracked. Her wide eyes were wider than normal. That's a lot of blood." Mineta passed out, just straight up fainted right there on Asui's back, which, honestly, was probably the smartest thing he'd done all day. Shigaraki watched from beside Eraserhead's body. His visible eye was twitching, his fingernails dug into his own neck, scratching furiously. "Who the hell is this NPC?" he hissed. "This isn't part of the plan. This isn't... Kurogiri. Who is this?" Kurogiri's mist form shifted uneasily. I don't know, Shigaraki Tomura. He doesn't match any hero in our database." "He's not a hero," Shigaraki snapped. "Heroes don't do that." He gestured at the carnage. Izuku was moving through the remaining villains in the landslide zone now. 3 of them tried to ambush him from Barak formation. He killed the first one with a 3-round burst, transitioned to his pistol for the second, 2 shots, both headshots, and took the third one hand to hand. The villain had a strength enhancement quirk and threw a punch that could have cratered a wall. Izuku ducked it, stepped inside the arc, and drove his combat knife up through the villain's chin and into his brain. The villain stood there for a moment, eyes going blank, then collapsed. Izuku pulled the knife free, wiped it on the dead man's shirt, and sheathed it. Todoroki Shoto had been in the landslide zone. He'd frozen a dozen villains solid and was in complete control of his sector when Izuku walked through it. Todoroki watched the skull-vested figure dispatch 3 villains in under 5 seconds and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Cold. Not from his quirk. From something deeper. A recognition. This person moved the way his father moved. With absolute certainty. With overwhelming force. but without the ego, without the showmanship. Endeavor fought to be seen. This person fought to end things. Who are you? Todoroki called out. Izuku didn't look at him. Not your problem, kid. Stay out of my way. He walked past Todoroki without slowing down, heading back to the central plaza, heading for Shigaraki. Todoroki stood there for a moment. Nobody had ever walked past him like that. Like he wasn't even worth acknowledging. He followed. By the time Izuku reached the central plaza again, the villain count had dropped from roughly 70 to roughly 12. The survivors were the smarter ones, the ones who'd seen what happened and decided that discretion was the better part of not dying. They were clustered around Shigaraki and Kurogiri, wild-eyed and shaking. Eraserhead was on the ground, conscious but barely. His face was a mess. His arms were broken. He lifted his head when he heard Izuku's boots on the concrete and saw the skull. His blood ran cold. He'd seen that skull before. In the task force files, in the police reports he'd been analyzing for months. You, Eraserhead rasped. You're the... Save it, Eraser. Izuku didn't look at him. His eyes were on Shigaraki. You're down and your students are scattered. I'd ask how you let this happen, but I already know. You're spread too thin and the system you work for doesn't give a damn about preparation, so do your job better next time and stay out of my way. Eraserhead opened his mouth, closed it. There was nothing to say to that. Shigaraki was scratching his neck so hard he was drawing blood. You ruined everything. You're not supposed to be here. This was supposed to be the debut. The statement. You were going to kill a bunch of teenagers to make a point to All Might. Izuku's voice was flat. That's not a revolution, Shigaraki. That's a tantrum. Shigaraki's eye went wide. How do you know I know everything about you. Tamura Shigaraki, no known surname prior to your recruitment. Decay quirk, 5-point contact disintegration. Recruited and groomed by an individual you refer to as Sensei, real identity classified. Your emotional regulation is garbage. Your tactical planning is amateurish, and your little army here was made up of bottom feeders and street trash that any competent planner would have known were useless against trained heroes. He raised the M4. But I'm not here for your army. I'm here because your weapon suppliers ran trigger through Hosu City, and anyone who touches that pipeline ends up in the ground. Shigaraki's face twisted. Nomu, kill him. The Nomu moved. It was fast, way too fast for something that big. It crossed the distance in a heartbeat, fist cocked back, all that engineered strength focused on turning Izuku Midoriya into a red smear on the floor. Izuku dropped the M4, already moving. He dove sideways, rolled, came up with the grenade launcher, an M32 rotary, 6 rounds loaded with thermite grenades he'd built himself. The Nomu's fist hit the ground where he'd been standing, and the concrete exploded upward in a crater 5 feet wide. Izuku fired. The thermite grenade hit the Nomu in the center of its exposed brain. The casing detonated on impact, and 4,000 degrees of white-hot incendiary compound erupted across the Nomu's skull. The creature screamed. A sound that wasn't human, wasn't animal, was something else entirely, something engineered to suffer. Shock absorption meant the Nomu could tank physical force. Super regeneration meant it could heal from injuries. But regeneration doesn't work if there's nothing left to regenerate from. The thermite burned through the exposed brain tissue like a blowtorch through butter. The Nomu staggered. Its massive hands clawed at its own head, trying to scrape away the molten fire. But thermite doesn't scrape off, it burns until its fuel is spent. The creature's movements became erratic, jerky, like a puppet with its strings cut one by one. Izuku fired again. A second thermite grenade, this one aimed at the Nomu's chest. It hit dead center and ignited, burning through the reinforced muscle tissue. The Nomu collapsed to its knees. Its regeneration was trying to work. You could see the tissue growing and burning at the same time. Izuku fired a third round, then a fourth. The Nomu stopped moving. It was still alive. The regeneration was still trying. But with 4 thermite charges burning simultaneously, melting through its body cavity, the creature had nothing left to work with. It twitched, smoked, made a sound like air escaping from a tire. Then it went still. The entire facility was silent. The students, scattered across the facility, watching from behind pillars and rock formations and flood zone shorelines, stared. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. They'd trained for emergencies. They'd studied villain encounters. They'd run simulations and disaster scenarios and combat exercises. None of that had prepared them for this. Uraraka Ochako was standing at the edge of the central plaza, hands pressed over her mouth. Her eyes were huge and wet. She'd fought through the ruin zone with 13's help and made it back just in time to see the Nomu burn. She felt sick. She felt terrified. And somewhere underneath all of that, in a place she'd never admit existed, she felt something else. Something that recognized instinctively that the person in the skull vest was the most capable combatant she had ever seen or would ever see. "What is he?" whispered. Behind her, Ida Tenya stood rigid. The engine-legged speedster who always followed the rules, always respected authority, always believed in the system. His hands were shaking. His visor was cracked from a fight in the downpour zone. He watched the skull-vested figure stand over the smoking remains of a bioweapon that had been designed to kill All Might, and he thought, that should be impossible. He's quirkless. That should be impossible. But the Nomu was down. The villains were dead or broken, and the impossible was standing right there, reloading a grenade launcher like he was changing batteries in a remote. Shigaraki stared at the Nomu. His Nomu. His masterpiece. The weapon Sensei had built specifically for this mission, designed with multiple quirks and engineered to be unstoppable, it was a smoking heap on the floor. "No," Shigaraki whispered. No, that's cheating. That's cheating. You can't just, that's not how this works." "You're right," Izuku said. He dropped the grenade launcher and drew his Beretta. "This is how it works." He fired twice. The first shot hit Shigaraki's left hand, the one reaching for the nearest villain to use as a shield. The bullet punched through his index and middle fingers, shattering the bones, tearing through the webbing between them. Shigaraki screamed and yanked his hand back. Two of the severed hands fell off his body and hit the floor. The second shot hit his right hand. Same result. Ring finger and pinky shattered. More of the decorative hands fell away, clattering on the concrete like morbid wind chimes. Shigaraki dropped to his knees, cradling his mangled hands against his chest, howling. Without 5-point contact, his decay quirk was useless. And without decay, Tamura Shigaraki was just a malnourished 20-year-old with bad skin and a victim complex. Izuku walked toward him, slowly, each step deliberate, the trench coat swaying behind him. The skull on his chest seemed to grin in the dust-choked light. "Let me explain something to you, Shigaraki, because I think you need to hear it." Izuku's voice was quiet now, almost gentle, which was somehow more terrifying than the gunfire. "You think you're special. You think your pain gives you the right to burn everything down. You think because someone hurt you, the whole world owes you a debt." He crouched in front of Shigaraki, eye to eye. "You're wrong. You're just a kid throwing a fit with a quirk that makes it dangerous. And the only reason you're still breathing right now is because killing you would make the person who sent you recruit someone smarter. And I'm not done with them yet." Shigaraki's eye, wide, bloodshot, leaking tears of rage and pain, locked onto Izuku's. I'll kill you," he whispered. "I'll find you and I'll kill you and I'll..." "No, you won't." Izuku stood up. "Because every time you try something, I'll be there. And next time I won't leave you with enough fingers to scratch your own neck." Kurogiri moved. The mist villain had been waiting for an opening, and he found one, wrapping Shigaraki in his warp gate, pulling him into the swirling black portal. Shigaraki vanished, screaming, leaving nothing behind but blood spatters and severed finger fragments. Kurogiri himself began to dissipate. But before he vanished entirely, his yellow eyes met Izuku's through the mist. "You have made a powerful enemy today," Kurogiri said. "Get in line," Izuku replied. The mist closed. They were gone. Izuku stood alone in the center of USJ, surrounded by bodies, shell casings, and smoke. He holstered the Beretta. He looked around the facility, at the students peering out from their hiding spots, at the broken eraser head trying to push himself upright, at the smoldering remains of the Nomu. He turned toward the exit. "Wait!" The voice came from behind him. Eraserhead, propped up on one arm, blood running down his face, staring at Izuku with his one good eye. "I know who you are, the skull, the killings. You're the Punisher." Izuku stopped walking. "You've killed over 40 people in the last year," Eraserhead continued. Eraserhead continued. "Villains, yes. Criminals, yes. But you executed them without trial, without due process. You're no better than Than them? Izuku looked over his shoulder. I'm worse. That's the point. He walked out of USJ. Behind him, Uraraka sat down on the floor. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. She stared at the spot where the skull-vested figure had stood and felt a tear slide down her cheek. She wasn't crying because she was scared. She was crying because some part of her, the part that had grown up in a household where money was always tight and the system never helped, understood exactly why someone would stop waiting for heroes and become something else entirely. Bakugo hadn't moved. He was standing in the same spot he'd been in when Izuku first walked through the door. His palms were still sparking. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He just watched a quirkless person do more damage in 10 minutes than every hero in this building had done combined. Katsuki Bakugo was a lot of things: arrogant, explosive, aggressive, prideful. But he wasn't stupid, and something in the back of his brain, in the deep reptilian part where honest instincts lived, said very clearly, he's better than you. And he doesn't even have a quirk. Bakugo gritted his teeth until his jaw ached. The aftermath of USJ shook Japan. The footage, security, cameras had captured fragments of the attack before Kurogiri's mist had disrupted most of the feeds, leaked within 48 hours. Grainy, chaotic clips of a figure in a skull vest mowing through villains with military hardware, the M60 sweep, the Nomu burning, the shots that crippled Shigaraki. It hit social media like a meteor. Within a day, the hashtag Punisher was trending in every country in the Pacific Rim. Within 2 days, it was global. The clips were everywhere: news broadcasts, hero analysis forums, villain sympathy boards, meme pages, everything. Somebody set the M60 sweep to doom music, and it got 30 million views in 12 hours. The reactions were split. Predictably, the Hero Public Safety Commission issued a statement condemning the use of lethal force by an unregistered individual and calling for the Punisher's immediate arrest. Endeavor held a press conference where he called the Punisher a rabid dog that needs to be put down. Several prominent heroes echoed the sentiment. The law was clear. Lethal vigilantism was a crime, and the Punisher would be brought to justice. But on the street, the story was different. In the neighborhoods that hero patrols forgot about, the gray zones, the poverty districts, the immigrant communities where quirk discrimination was a daily reality, the skull became a symbol. People spray painted it on walls, they put it on t-shirts, they whispered the name like a prayer. Because the dirty truth that no one in power wanted to admit was simple. The Punisher had done what the heroes couldn't. He'd stopped the USJ attack, he'd destroyed the Nomu, he'd crippled the League of Villains leader, and he'd done it faster, more decisively, and more completely than any hero on the scene could have managed. All Might, the symbol of peace, the number one hero, the man who was supposed to have been at USJ that day, gave no public comment. But inside UA, behind closed doors, the conversation was a firestorm. Principal Nezu, the hyper-intelligent animal who ran UA with a cheerful smile and a mind like a supercomputer, called an emergency faculty meeting. Every teacher attended. Recovery Girl, Present Mike, Midnight, 13. Even Eraserhead, wrapped in bandages from head to toe, insisted on being there. All Might sat at the end of the table. He was in his true form, the skeletal, sunken-eyed version of himself that he hid from the world. He looked old, tired. His blue eyes were haunted. Nezu laid out the facts. The Punisher was quirkless. He operated alone. He had military-grade training and access to weapons that suggested either black market connections or significant financial resources. He had been active for approximately 1 year and was responsible for the confirmed deaths of 43 criminals. He appeared to be targeting organized villain networks systematically. And he's young, Eraserhead said. His voice was muffled by bandages. I saw him up close. He's a kid, 15, maybe 16. The room went cold. A child? All Might's voice was barely a whisper. A child who fights like a special forces operative and has the emotional affect of a corpse, Eraserhead replied. I've been in the underground my entire career. I've seen vigilantes, I've seen criminals, I've seen killers. I've never seen anyone like him. Could he be connected to a larger organization? Midnight asked. No, I've cross-referenced every intelligence source available. He's solo, completely independent. Whatever training he received, he's operating alone now. Then we find him, Present Mike said. We find him and we bring him in. He's a kid. We can help him. Can we? Eraserhead looked around the table. Can we really? Because he looked at me like I was an insect. He looked at Shigaraki like he was a problem to be solved. And he looked at those students like they were background noise. Whatever happened to that kid, it happened a long time ago, and I don't think there's much left to save. All Might stared at the table. His bony hands were clasped in front of him. He was thinking about something. About a boy he'd met on a rooftop once, a quirkless boy with green hair and tears in his eyes, who had asked him if someone without a quirk could be a hero. All Might had told him the truth, that it was too dangerous, that he should find another dream. He'd always wondered what happened to that boy. Now he knew. And the weight of it pressed down on Toshinori Yagi's hollow chest like a mountain. 2 weeks after USJ, the sports festival began. The UA Sports Festival was the biggest event on Japan's calendar. Bigger than the Olympics, bigger than any hero gala or villain crisis. 80,000 spectators in the stadium, millions watching on television. Every hero agency in the country scouting for talent, every media outlet covering every match. For one day, the entire nation's attention was fixed on a single location, which made it the perfect distraction. Izuku had no interest in the sports festival. He didn't care about the students, their quirks, their rivalries, or their dreams. He cared about one thing: the compound in Yokohama's industrial district, where the remnants of the organization that killed his family had consolidated after he'd spent the last year dismantling them piece by piece. The Crimson Chain. That's what they called themselves. A hybrid outfit, part villain gang, part organized crime syndicate, that had controlled trigger distribution, illegal quirk enhancement, and contract killings across 3 prefectures. They'd been one of the groups fighting over the Naruhata district 5 years ago. Their enforcers had been responsible for the quirk attacks that turned a quiet street into a war zone. Their bullets had killed his father. Their flames had killed his mother. He'd spent 5 years hunting them, cutting off limbs, burning supply lines, killing middle managers and lieutenants and foot soldiers until the organization was a fraction of what it had been. But the head, a man named Ryuji Tendo, a Yakuza-connected boss who ran the Crimson Chain from behind layers of proxies and shell companies, had always been untouchable, until today. Because today, every hero in Japan was at the sports festival. Every patrol was reduced. Every security system was focused on the UA campus. And Ryuji Tendo, who had survived 5 years of the Punisher's war by hiding behind hero-level security, had made one mistake. He'd invited his top lieutenants to watch the festival together at his compound. A private viewing party. All the bosses in one room. Izuku had the layout. He had the guard schedules. He had the entry points. He had spent 2 weeks planning this operation the way Sato had taught him. Every variable accounted for, every contingency addressed. Every element of the mission calibrated to maximize lethality and minimize exposure. He arrived at the compound at 1:47 p.m., precisely as the second event of the sports festival, the cavalry battle, was beginning. He parked 2 blocks away, checked his gear, body armor, full kit, skull vest over everything, shotgun, Benelli M4, semi-automatic, loaded with double-aught buckshot, 2 Beretta 92s, combat knife, 4 fragmentation grenades, 2 blocks of C4 with remote detonators, extra magazines strapped to every available surface. He chambered around, walked to the compound. The first guard was at the gate, a big man, quirk unknown, carrying a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. He saw Izuku coming and started to raise his weapon. Izuku shot him in the face with the shotgun from 12 feet away. The guard dropped. The gate swung open. Inside, the compound was a converted warehouse. 3 stories, reinforced walls, catwalks along the upper levels. The ground floor was an open space with crates and shipping containers scattered around. The second floor held offices and living quarters. The third floor, the penthouse level, was Tendo's private suite where the viewing party was happening. There were 37 armed criminals between Izuku and the third floor. It took him 9 minutes. The ground floor was chaos. Guards poured out of side rooms and from behind shipping containers, firing weapons, actual guns for some, quirk-based attacks for others. Izuku moved through them the way water moves through a cracked dam. Forward. Always forward. Never stopping, never backing up, never taking cover for more than a second. The shotgun cleared the first room. 4 guards. 4 shots. The Benelli's semi-auto action meant he could fire, cycle, and fire again faster than most people could blink. Bodies hit the floor. Blood splashed across crate walls. He transitioned to the Berettas in the narrow hallway that led to the stairwell. Dual-wielded, one in each hand, moving in a tactical crouch. A guard came around the corner and caught 2 rounds in the chest before his brain registered that someone was there. Another guard, this one with a strengthening quirk, muscles bulging, fists like cinder blocks, charged from a side door. Izuku shot him in the knee, collapsing him, then put a round through the top of his skull as he fell forward. The stairwell was where it got ugly. 3 guards on the stairs, armed with automatic weapons. And they heard him coming and opened up, bullets chewing through the drywall. Izuku pulled a fragmentation grenade, popped the pin with his thumb, cooked it for 2 seconds, and tossed it up the stairwell. It bounced off the railing and detonated at chest height. The blast sent bodies tumbling. Izuku was already moving up the stairs, stepping over the wreckage. One guard was still alive, crawling, dragging a shattered leg behind him. Izuku stomped on his spine as he passed. The crawling stopped. The second floor was a hallway of offices, doors on both sides, each one potentially an ambush. This was the kind of CQB that the Krav Maga instructor in Osaka had spent 3 months teaching him, confined space combat, where the margin between living and dying was measured in inches and milliseconds. He kicked the first door open. Empty. Second door. A guard with a handgun behind a desk. Izuku fired through the desk. The bullets punched through the thin wood and caught the guard in the abdomen. He fell screaming. Izuku stepped in and finished him. Third door. 2 guards. One had a blade quirk, hardened edges growing from his forearms, similar to Gash but longer, thinner. The other had a smoke quirk that filled the room with thick gray fog. Izuku pulled the pin on a flashbang, tossed it into the smoke, and covered his eyes. The detonation, 180 decibels, 7 million candela, turned the room into a white-hot nightmare. Both guards staggered, blinded, ears bleeding. Izuku walked through the smoke and killed them both with his knife. Hallway clear. Next room. Next. Next. His breathing was steady. His pulse was elevated but controlled. He'd trained his body to metabolize adrenaline. It sharpened him, focused him. The 4th office had a barricade. Someone had pushed a heavy desk against the door. Izuku planted a small breaching charge, a shaped explosive no bigger than a playing card, against the door frame and detonated it from 5 feet away. The door blew inward, the desk with it. The guard behind it was pinned by his own barricade. Izuku shot him through the gap. By the time he reached the stairwell to the 3rd floor, 12 minutes had passed since he'd entered the compound. 29 of the 37 guards were dead. The remaining 8 were on the 3rd floor. With Tendo behind a reinforced steel door, Izuku planted C4. The explosion ripped the door off its hinges and sent it flying into the room like a rectangular missile. It caught one guard full body and carried him into the far wall. He didn't get up. Izuku stepped through the smoking doorway and into Ryuji Tendo's penthouse. It was a nice room, expensive furniture, a massive TV screen showing the sports festival. On the screen, Todoroki was unleashing a glacier of ice that covered half the stadium, and the crowd was going insane. Fine liquor on a bar in the corner, art on the walls. The kind of space a man builds when he wants to forget that his money comes from blood. 7 guards remained. They were arranged in a semicircle in front of Tendo, weapons drawn, faces pale. Tendo himself sat in a leather chair staring at Izuku. He was 53 years old, gray-haired, heavy-set, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a year. His quirk was called Pressure Wave. He could generate concussive blasts from his palms, strong enough to crush cars at close range. He'd used it to build an empire. He'd used it to kill rivals, silence witnesses, and maintain order in his organization through raw physical terror. He'd also used it 5 years ago in the Naruhata district. Not personally, he'd been miles away in this very compound, directing the turf war from a safe distance, but his orders had put the soldiers on those streets. His war had started the fight. His ambition had killed Hisashi and Inko Midoriya. He looked at the skull on Izuku's chest. He knew what it was. Everyone in the underworld knew what it was by now. "So you're the one," Tendo said. His voice was calm. "You've been a real pain in my ass, kid. You know that?" "I know," Izuku said. "You killed 40 of my people. burned my supply lines, cost me millions. 53. You're behind on the numbers. Tendo smiled. It was a cold smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. You're good, I'll give you that. For a quirkless nobody, you're impressive. But you're in my house now. And you brought, a couple handguns to a quirk fight? Izuku looked at the 7 guards, then at Tendo, then back at the guards. I brought enough. The guards opened fire, and Izuku became a blur. He dove left behind the overturned steel door that was still lying on the floor. Bullets ricocheted off it with sharp, metallic pings. He rolled, came up with both Berettas, and fired from a crouch. 2 guards dropped, 1 shot in the throat, 1 in the eye. He was already moving again, using the furniture for cover, firing between gaps. A guard with a concrete quirk. He could harden his skin to a stone-like consistency. Charged him head-on. Izuku let him come. At the last second, he sidestepped, grabbed the man's arm, and used his momentum to redirect him into the bar. Bottles shattered. The guard staggered. Izuku put the Beretta against the back of his neck where the concrete skin was thinnest, and fired. 3 guards left. 2 of them made the mistake of bunching together. Izuku pulled his last fragmentation grenade and bounced it off the ceiling. It landed between them and detonated. The shrapnel tore through both of them. The last guard, a woman with a speed quirk fast enough to cross the room in a blink, came at him from the side. She was quick. Genuinely quick. Her fist connected with Izuku's jaw and snapped his head sideways. He tasted blood. She hit him again, a combination face, ribs, kidney. Izuku took the hits, all of them. His body absorbed the punishment the way it had been trained to, not by avoiding pain, but by refusing to let pain change anything. He caught her 4th punch, twisted her arm, dislocated her elbow, and threw her over his hip into the floor. She hit the hardwood face first. Before she could move, his boot was on her neck. He pressed down. A sound like a branch breaking in a quiet forest. Silence. Izuku stood up. His lip was split. Blood ran down his chin. He barely noticed. He holstered the Berettas and turned to Tendo. The crime boss was standing now. His hands were up, palms facing forward. The air in front of him shimmered. Pressure wave. He was charging his quirk, building up a concussive blast that would paint Izuku across the far wall. You're fast, kid. I'll give you that. But you made a mistake coming here. You think guns and knives can beat a quirk? You think... Izuku threw the combat knife. It left his hand and crossed the 15 feet between them before Tendo's brain finished processing the motion. The blade buried itself in Tendo's right palm, punching through muscle and tendon and out the other side. Tendo screamed. His quirk misfired. The pressure wave discharged sideways, blowing a hole in the wall the size of a refrigerator, but missing Izuku completely. Izuku closed the distance. 4 steps. He grabbed the knife handle and twisted. Tendo screamed again. Izuku ripped the knife free, grabbed Tendo by the collar, and slammed him back into his leather chair. Tendo looked up at him. The calm was gone. The control was gone. All that was left was fear. The deep, primal animal fear of a man who has just realized, truly realized, that he is going to die. 5 years ago, Izuku said. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before thunder. Naruhara District, October. Your soldiers fought the Yakuza for 3 blocks. 17 civilians died. The heroes arrived 4 minutes late. Tendo's mouth worked. No sound came out. A woman named Izuku Midoriya burned to death on the sidewalk. A man named Hisashi Midoriya was disintegrated in the street. Their 10-year-old son was shot in the head and left in a puddle of his mother's blood. Izuku leaned in close enough for Tendo to see the scar on his skull, the one from the bullet that should have killed him. I'm the son. Tendo's eyes went wide. The color drained from his face like water from a tub. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. It wasn't. It was your war, your soldiers, your orders. You sat in this room and watched the money roll in while people burned. Tendo was shaking now, visibly shaking. His hands, one mangled, one whole, were trembling in his lap. Tears leaked from his eyes, not tears of remorse, tears of terror. I can give you money, he whispered. I can give you names, I can give you everything, every contact, every network, I don't want your network. I've already destroyed it. Then what do you want? Izuku looked at him. Those empty green eyes, the flat, dead expression that hadn't changed since he walked through the door. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered behind the mask. Something ancient and wounded and furious. The ghost of a 10-year-old boy who loved Katsudan and hero notebooks and his mother's smile. "I want my family back," Izuku said. "But since I can't have that..." He raised the Beretta. Tendo lunged. Pressure wave erupted from his uninjured hand. A desperate, full-power blast aimed at Izuku's chest. It hit. Hard. The concussive force threw Izuku backward, cracking his body armor, slamming him into the wall. He felt ribs crack, tasted blood. The room spun. But he didn't go down. He slid down the wall, coughed, and stood back up. Tendo stared at him, horrified. The blast should have crushed his internal organs, should have killed him. Izuku raised the Beretta again. His hand was steady. Rock steady. "That all you got?" Bang, Ryuji Tendo's body fell back into the leather chair. His eyes were open. His expression was surprise. Just like Hisashi's, Izuku stood there, breathing hard, ribs screaming, blood on his face, his hands, his vest. The room smelled like cordite and fear. He looked at the TV screen. On it, the sports festival had moved to the tournament bracket. Todoroki Shoto and Katsuki Bakugo were squaring off in the finals. Todoroki's ice was climbing toward the sky. Bakugo's explosions were painting the arena in fire and smoke. The crowd was on its feet. Izuku watched for 3 seconds. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the remote detonator for the remaining C4 charges he'd planted on the building's support columns during his ascent. He pressed the button. The charges detonated in sequence. Ground floor, second floor, structural walls. The building groaned. The floor tilted. Glass shattered. Izuku walked out through the hole Tendo's misfired pressure wave had made in the wall, dropped 2 stories to the fire escape, climbed down, and walked away at a steady pace. Behind him, the compound collapsed. 3 stories of reinforced warehouse folded in on itself like a house of cards, sending a plume of dust and debris into the afternoon sky. At the sports festival, Todoroki and Bakugo's final clash produced an explosion visible from across the city. The crowd screamed. The commentators shouted. Millions of viewers were glued to their screens. Nobody noticed the building that collapsed in Yokohama's industrial district. Nobody except the people who were supposed to notice. The underworld noticed. Because in the rubble of that building lay the corpses of Ryuji Tendo and every senior lieutenant of the Crimson Chain. The organization that had dominated trigger distribution across 3 prefectures for 20 years was gone. Erased. Eliminated in a single afternoon. And somewhere in the dust, barely visible on a fragment of concrete, someone found a spray-painted white skull. The weeks after the sports festival were a strange time. The hero world was celebrating. Todoroki Shoto and Katsuki Bakugo had put on performances that analysts called generational. Hero agencies were lining up to offer internships. Students were choosing mentors. The system was working exactly the way it was supposed to. But underneath the celebration, something had shifted. A fault line that had always existed, the gap between the hero system's promises and its actual performance, had cracked wide open. And the Punisher was the crowbar. The public conversation had split into 2 camps. On one side, the establishment, heroes, police, politicians, media, condemned the Punisher in absolute terms. He was a murderer, a menace, a symptom of societal decay. On the other side, a growing and increasingly vocal population said something else. Said that the Punisher had cleaned up neighborhoods that heroes had abandoned. Said that crime rates in areas where the skull had appeared had dropped by double-digit percentages. Said that maybe, just maybe, the system needed someone who didn't play by its rules. The debates were fierce. Comment sections, talk shows, message boards, and street corner arguments all centered on the same question. Was the Punisher a villain, or was he the only honest person in a dishonest system? Eraserhead didn't care about the debates. He cared about the kid. After USJ, he'd gone back to the security footage. Frame by frame, pixel by pixel. He'd enhanced every available image, cross-referenced the height and build estimates with every missing persons report in the system, and run the Punisher's tactical patterns through a behavioral analysis model he'd developed during his years as an underground hero. He found the boy, Izuku Midoriya, declared missing at age 10 from Amino Ward Group Home, sole survivor of the Naruhata massacre, Quirkless. Parents, Hisashi and Inko Midoriya, both deceased. Eraserhead stared at the file for a long time. At the school photo, a smiling kid with green hair and freckles and the brightest eyes you'd ever seen. Happy. open, alive. He closed the file, leaned back in his chair, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: responsibility. Because Shodaizawa had been on patrol in the Naruhata district the night of the massacre. He'd been 10 blocks away when the fighting started. He'd heard the explosions. He'd responded as quickly as he could. He'd arrived 4 minutes and 30 seconds late. The hero killer emerged 3 weeks after the sports festival. His name was Chizome Akaguro. His alias was Stain. He was a former vigilante who had devolved into a serial murderer of pro-heroes, targeting those he deemed false or unworthy of the title. His quirk was Blood Curdle. He could paralyze anyone whose blood he ingested, and the effect lasted up to 8 minutes depending on blood type. He was armed with multiple blades, extraordinarily fast, and had a fanaticism that bordered on religious. In the span of 2 weeks, Stain killed 3 heroes and critically injured 7 others, all in the Hosu City area. He operated at night in the alleys and side streets where hero patrols were thin. He targeted heroes who worked alone or in pairs, overwhelmed them with speed and blade work, and left them bleeding out with a message carved into the nearest wall: fake. The hero world was terrified. Not because Stain was the strongest villain they'd faced, he wasn't, but because his ideology was seductive. He argued that most heroes were in it for the fame, the money, the glory, that the true spirit of heroism, the selfless desire to save others, the willingness to sacrifice everything, had been corrupted by a system that turned saving lives into a career path. He said that only All Might was a true hero. Everyone else was a fraud. And the uncomfortable truth was, a lot of people agreed with him. Stain was especially dangerous because he gave the Punisher's followers a philosophical framework. The Punisher killed criminals the heroes couldn't catch. Stain killed heroes who didn't deserve the title. Together, they represented 2 halves of the same argument. The system is broken. The hero killer's reign of terror reached Hosu City on a Thursday night. The attack was coordinated. 3 Nomu, smaller, weaker versions of the USJ creature, deployed by the League of Villains who were using Stain's activity as cover, were released into the city to cause chaos. Buildings burned. Citizens ran. Heroes scrambled to respond. In the confusion, Stain cornered his real target. The hero Native, a mid-ranked pro-hero who patrolled Hosu's eastern district. He ambushed Native in an alley, slashed him across the back, and drank his blood. Native collapsed, paralyzed, bleeding. Ida Tenya found them. Ida was in Hosu City for his internship. He'd chosen the Hosu area specifically because of Stain. The hero killer had crippled Ida's older brother Ingenium 2 weeks earlier. Ida had come to Hosu for one reason: revenge. He found the alley. He found Stain standing over Native's body. He activated his engine quirk, the biomechanical thrusters in his calves that gave him superhuman speed, and charged. Stain sidestepped. His sword caught Ida across the arm, drawing blood. Stain licked the blade. Ida froze mid-step, his body locking up, paralyzed by blood curdle. He hit the ground hard. Face first. Engine quirk still sputtering, but his muscles wouldn't respond. Stain stood over him, red scarf blowing in the wind, bandaged face, eyes like hot coals. Ingenium's brother, Stain said. You came here seeking vengeance, not justice. That makes you a false hero, just like him. He raised his sword. Any last words, boy? The sound came from above, not a dramatic entrance, not a hero's call. Just the sound of boots hitting pavement as someone dropped 15 feet from a fire escape landing and absorbed the impact with bent knees and a forward roll. Izuku Midoriya stood up at the mouth of the alley. Skull vest, trench coat, beretta in his right hand, combat knife in his left. Scar on his skull catching the light from a distant fire. Stain turned. Slowly. His eyes, burning, fanatical eyes, found the skull and widened. You, Stain breathed. The word came out reverent, almost worshipful. The Punisher. Izuku said nothing. He was assessing. The alley was narrow, 10 feet wide, 40 feet deep, 2 civilians down, 1 paralyzed, 1 bleeding, 1 target, armed with multiple blades. Known quirk, blood ingestion leads to paralysis. Range, melee. Weakness needs to consume blood, which requires cutting first. Speed high, pain tolerance high, fanaticism off the charts. I've been hoping to meet you, Stain continued. He lowered his sword slightly. Not a sign of submission, but a sign of respect. We're the same, you and I. We see the truth. The hero system is a lie. The heroes are frauds. You kill the villains they can't be bothered to stop. I kill the heroes who don't deserve the name. We're 2 sides of the same coin. No, Izuku said. We're not. Of course we are. You reject the system. I reject the system. We both believe that the only way to fix this broken world is... I kill scum. Izuku's voice was flat, hard. Drug dealers, traffickers, killers, people who prey on the weak because the system lets them. That's my war. He pointed the Beretta at Stain. You kill kids. You crippled a man whose only crime was calling himself a hero and trying to help people, and you're standing over another kid right now about to do the same thing. Stain's expression shifted. The reverence curdled into something colder. Ingenium was a fraud. This boy is a fraud. They fight for glory, for recognition, for... I don't care why they fight. I care that you carve up teenagers in alleys and call it philosophy. Izuku cocked the hammer on the Beretta. That puts you on my list. Stain's eyes went cold. The respect was gone. What replaced it was the thing that made the hero killer truly dangerous. Certainty. Total, absolute, unwavering certainty in his own righteousness. Then you've chosen your side, Punisher. And you've chosen wrong. Stain moved fast. God, he was fast. The hero killer crossed 15 feet of alley in a heartbeat, sword leading, angled for Izuku's throat. His technique was impeccable, a lunging thrust that used his entire body's momentum designed to pierce or decapitate. Izuku fired. The Beretta barked twice, both shots aimed center mass. Stain twisted. The first round caught his shoulder but was deflected by the layered armor under his scarf. He wasn't unprotected. The second round grazed his ribs. He barely flinched. The sword thrust came in hard and fast. Izuku sidestepped, almost. The blade caught his left shoulder, punching through the trench coat and the body armor underneath, sinking 3 inches into muscle. Izuku grunted. Blood welled around the blade. Stain grinned. Blood on the blade. One lick and the Punisher would be paralyzed. Izuku didn't give him the chance. He grabbed the blade with his bare left hand, wrapped his fingers around the razor edge, and squeezed. Blood poured down his wrist. The pain was extraordinary, like grabbing a handful of broken glass. But Izuku Midoriya had been taking pain since he was 10 years old, and he'd stopped letting it make decisions for him a long time ago. He gripped the blade and pulled Stain toward him. Stain's eyes went wide. Nobody had ever done that. Nobody had ever grabbed his blade with their bare hand and pulled. Izuku drove his forehead, protected by the Kevlar-lined helmet he wore under his hair, into the bridge of Stain's nose. The impact was enormous. Cartilage crunched. Blood exploded across both their faces. Stain staggered back, releasing the sword, his vision swimming. Izuku ripped the sword out of his own shoulder with a sound that made Ida's stomach lurch. He tossed it aside, drew the Beretta again, this time left-handed, his right hand pressing against the wound. Stain recovered fast. He pulled a shorter blade from his belt, a tanto, 9 inches of folded steel, and slashed at Izuku's face. Izuku leaned back, felt the blade whisper past his nose, and fired. The round hit Stain's right kneecap. The bone shattered. Stain screamed, a raw animal howl, and dropped to one knee. Izuku fired again. Left kneecap. Same result. Stain collapsed, both legs destroyed. The hero killer fell forward onto his hands, blades scattering across the alley. His bandaged face was a mask of blood. His eyes were wild, feverish, burning with fury and pain, and that unshakable conviction. You can't. Stain gasped. The system must be purged. Izuku stood over him, bleeding from the shoulder, bleeding from the hand, bruised and battered, and still as immovable as a pillar of iron. The system is broken, Izuku said. You're right about that. But you don't fix a broken system by carving up kids in dark alleys. You don't earn the right to judge who's worthy and who's not. You're just a psycho with a sword fetish who found a pretty excuse to murder people. Behind them, Ida was on the ground, paralyzed, but his eyes were open. He could see everything, and he could hear everything. He heard the Punisher say those words. He heard someone who had every reason to agree with Stain, who had suffered at the hands of the same broken system, who had lost everything because the heroes weren't there in time, reject the hero killer's philosophy. Not because the heroes were right, but because killing the weak and the young was never justified, no matter what banner you hung over it. Please, Ida croaked. The paralysis was wearing off. His fingers twitched. Please don't kill him. Izuku looked at Ida, those dead green eyes, that face that showed nothing. For a long moment, the alley was silent except for Stain's ragged breathing and the distant sound of Nomu rampaging through the city. Why? Izuku asked. Because. Ida swallowed. Tears ran down his face. Because he hurt my brother, and I came here wanting to kill him, and I was wrong. If you kill him, then what was the point of me realizing that? Izuku stared at him. The heroes let my mother bleed out in the gutter, Ida. She died on the sidewalk. She was reaching for me. She was trying to say a nursery rhyme she used to read me at bedtime, and she died before she could finish it. The system didn't save her. The heroes didn't save her. Nobody saved her. He looked down at Stain, then back at Ida. The system is broken. I'm just the consequence. He raised the Beretta. Wait, Ida started. Bang! The sound echoed through the alley and bounced off the buildings and faded into the smoke-filled sky above Hosu City. Stain's body hit the pavement. Face down. Still, the hero killer, the man who had terrorized Japan's hero community and murdered or crippled 17 pro heroes, lay in a pool of his own blood in a dirty alley behind a convenience store. Izuku holstered the gun. He looked at Ida one more time. Your brother was brave. He went out and tried to do something. That's more than most heroes can say. Don't throw that away by becoming like me. He turned and walked toward the mouth of the alley. Wait, Ida's voice cracked. The paralysis was wearing off, but his body was still mostly immobile. Who are you? Why do you? What happened to you? Izuku stopped. He stood at the edge of the alley, silhouetted by the distant fires of the Nomu attacks, the skull on his chest visible even in the dark. My name is Izuku Midoriya, he said, without turning around, and I'm the guy who cleans up the messes the heroes are too afraid to handle. He walked into the smoke and disappeared. Todoroki Shoto arrived 90 seconds later. He'd been on patrol in Hosu as part of his internship with Endeavor when the Nomu attacked. He'd seen the destruction, responded, and was cutting through alleys when he heard the gunshot. He rounded the corner and found Ida Tenya on the ground, native bleeding but alive, and a dead man in a red scarf lying face down in a puddle of blood. Ida. Todoroki rushed to his classmate's side. What happened? Are you... Stain, Ida managed. The paralysis was fading, feeling returning to his limbs in painful waves. Stain attacked me, and then he came. Who? Ida looked up at Todoroki with red-rimmed eyes. The Punisher. Todoroki went still. He looked at the body on the ground, at the devastation in the alley, blood, scattered blades, bullet casings, at the spray of red on the wall where the final shot had done its work. He was here, Todoroki said quietly. He killed Stain, right in front of me. I begged him not to. He didn't listen. Are you hurt? Cuts. Nothing deep. But Todoroki, Ida's voice broke. He was Quirkless. The Punisher is Quirkless. He fought Stain, the hero killer, the man who destroyed my brother, and he won, with guns and a knife in his bare hands. Todoroki said nothing for a long time. He helped Ida sit up. He checked Native's wounds. He pulled out his phone and called for emergency services. While they waited, Todoroki looked at the mouth of the alley, at the darkness the Punisher had vanished into. At USJ, Todoroki said softly, he walked past me. I tried to talk to him, and he walked past me like I was furniture. I have the quirk of the #1 hero. And he looked at me like I was nothing. He looks at everyone like that, Ida whispered. No, he looked at you differently. When you asked him not to kill, he looked at you like you reminded him of something. Ida closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw those green eyes, empty, hollow, dead. And underneath them, buried so deep it was almost invisible, the ghost of a boy who used to cry easily and love heroes and believe that the world was good. Something he lost, Ida said. The death of Stain broke the internet, not just in Japan. Globally, the hero killer had been international news. His ideology, his kill count, his manifesto had all gone viral. Villain sympathizers had turned him into a folk hero. Fan pages, tribute videos, ideological screeds dressed up as philosophy. Stain represented something to the disillusioned, the idea that someone was finally holding the heroes accountable, and the Punisher killed him. The video surfaced within hours. Someone, it was never determined who, had been filming from an apartment window above the alley. Shaky footage, poor lighting, but clear enough. Stain's attack on Ida, the Punisher dropping from the fire escape, the fight, the headbutt, the kneecaps, the execution. It hit the internet, and the internet lost its collective mind. The pro-hero establishment was, for once, almost unified. The Punisher had killed the hero killer. That was good. Stain was a murderer. But the Punisher had also killed him without trial, without due process, in front of a student. That was bad. The method was bad. The precedent was bad. Everything about it was complicated and messy and resistant to simple narratives. Stain's followers were furious. Their idol had been gunned down like a dog by a man they thought was an ally. Death threats against the Punisher flooded social media. Stain tribute pages became recruitment tools for the growing villain underground. But another faction emerged, louder, angrier, and more numerous than anyone expected. People who said Stain killed heroes. The Punisher killed Stain. The Punisher kills everyone who hurts people. The Punisher is the only one who doesn't play favorites. The skull became more than a symbol. It became a movement. In Camino Ward, someone painted a 30-foot skull on the side of a building overnight. In Hosu City, the alley where Stain died became a pilgrimage site. In Musutafu, a teenager was arrested for selling skull t-shirts outside a police station. The Hero Public Safety Commission held an emergency session. The topic: the Punisher represented an existential threat to the hero system. Not because the criminals they could handle criminals, but because he was proving publicly and repeatedly that one quirkless human with the right training and the right motivation could do what the entire hero system could not. And if people started believing that heroes were unnecessary, the system would collapse. All Might sat in his office at UA and read the file on Izuku Midoriya, 10 years old. Quirkless, sole survivor, missing from the system for 5 years. Parents murdered in a battle between organizations that the hero community had known about and failed to address. All Might remembered him now. The boy on the rooftop, the green hair, the tears. The question, can someone without a quirk be a hero? And All Might's answer, no. Toshinori Yagi set the file down. He pressed his skeletal hands against his face. And in the silence of his office, in the failing body that was all that remained of the symbol of peace, he did something he hadn't done in years. He wept, because the boy had asked him for hope, and he had denied him. And the world that existed now, the world of the skull, the body count, the fear, was, in some small but undeniable way, the consequence. The underworld felt it first. After the sports festival assassination and the death of the hero killer, the criminal networks of Japan experienced something unprecedented. Fear. Real, systemic, paralyzing fear. The Punisher had dismantled the Crimson Chain. He'd crippled Shigaraki. He'd executed Stain. No target was too big. No security was sufficient. No quirk was protection enough. Entire organizations went dark. Safe houses were abandoned overnight. Drug shipments were rerouted through increasingly expensive and unstable channels. Recruitment dried up. Who wanted to join a villain gang when a quirkless teenager with an M60 might show up at your door? Crime rates plummeted. In the districts where the Punisher had operated, violent crime dropped by 40% in 3 months. Property crime dropped by 30%. Citizens who had lived in fear for years, fear of the villains who extorted them, the gangs that terrorized their neighborhoods, the criminals who operated with impunity, reported feeling safe for the first time in memory. The irony was bitter. The hero system had spent decades and trillions of yen trying to reduce crime. One kid with a death wish and a gun collection had done more in a year. Eraserhead tracked the data. He mapped the pattern, and he came to a conclusion that he shared with no one, because saying it out loud would have been career suicide. The Punisher was winning, and the hero system was losing. Not in a battle, in an argument. The argument about what safety really looked like and who actually provided it. The League of Villains regrouped. Shigaraki's hands healed, mostly. The bullet damage was permanent. He'd lost full functionality in 4 fingers, which meant his decay quirk required careful positioning to activate. He was weaker, he was furious, and he was obsessed. "The Punisher," he muttered, scratching his neck in the bar that served as the League's temporary headquarters. "The Punisher, the Punisher, the Punisher. I'm going to find him. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to watch him crumble to dust, piece by piece, starting with his face." Kurogiri polished a glass and said nothing. Behind them in the shadows, a screen flickered. A deep voice, digitally altered, coming from somewhere far away, spoke. "Patience, Tamura. All for one, the master, the architect, the man behind the curtain. The Punisher is dangerous, more dangerous than you realize, not because of his combat ability, though that is considerable, but because of what he represents. He is proof that the hero system fails. He is a walking indictment of everything All Might built, and that makes him useful. Shigaraki stopped scratching. Useful. The Punisher destabilizes the system from the outside. We destabilize it from within. We do not need to fight him. We need to let him fight for us. He shot my fingers off. And in doing so, he demonstrated to the world that the League of Villains is a force significant enough to draw the Punisher's attention. Your defeat at USJ was a setback. But the Punisher's attack on the sports festival compound and his execution of the hero killer have done more to erode public faith in heroes than anything we could have planned. Shigaraki fell silent. Processing. For now, All for One continued. We rebuild. We recruit. We prepare. The Punisher will serve his purpose. And when the time comes, when the hero system has been sufficiently weakened by his actions and ours, we will deal with him. Permanently. The screen flickered off. Shigaraki stared at the blank screen, scratched his neck, and smiled. On a rooftop in Musatafu, under a sky full of stars, Izuku Midoriya sat with his back against an air conditioning unit and cleaned his weapons. The Beretta came apart in his hands with practiced ease. Slide, barrel, recoil spring, frame. He cleaned each component with a worn rag, checking for wear, checking for imperfections. The routine was meditative. It was the closest thing to peace he'd experienced in 5 years. His shoulder was bandaged. The stab wound from Stain was deep but clean. He'd treated it himself, stitched it in a safe house bathroom mirror, packed it with gauze. It would heal. Everything healed, eventually. Except the things that mattered. He reassembled the Beretta, racked the slide, dry-fired, satisfied. He set the gun down and looked at the city. Musatafu glittered below him. 1,000,000 lights. 1,000,000 lives. People sleeping, eating, arguing, loving, worrying about bills and relationships, and whether their quirks were strong enough, and whether they'd make it into the hero course, and all the 1,000 ordinary concerns of ordinary existence. Izuku didn't feel part of it. He hadn't felt part of anything in a long time. He existed at the edge of the world, in the dark spaces between the lights, and he did his work. And then he came to places like this and sat alone and tried not to think about the things that thinking couldn't fix. His mother's voice. That was the thing he was most afraid of losing. Not her face. He had photos, burned into his memory with perfect clarity. Not her name, not the facts of her life, her voice. The exact tone and pitch and warmth of her voice when she called him for dinner or told him to put on a jacket or read him his bedtime story. 1 batch, 2 batch, penny and dime. She'd made it up, a silly little rhyme about a rabbit who counted pennies. It didn't make sense. It didn't need to make sense. It was hers. It was theirs. The sound of her voice saying those words was the last good thing in Izuku Midoriya's life, and it was fading, a little more every day, like a photograph left in the sun. He pressed his palms against his eyes, his scarred, calloused, blood-stained hands against his eyes. And he sat there on the rooftop, 15 years old, alone, the most dangerous person in Japan, and he breathed. He did not cry. That part of him was dead, but he breathed. And for a moment, in the space between breaths, he heard it, her voice, penny and dime. He lowered his hands, picked up the Beretta, holstered it, stood up. Below him, the city continued, the lights continued, the lives continued. And in the morning, the news would run another story about the Punisher, another analysis, another debate, another attempt to understand the thing that moved through their world like a blade through water. They would never understand. And that was fine. Izuku Midoriya didn't need understanding. He didn't need approval or support or companionship or any of the things that normal people needed to get through their normal lives. He needed the mission, the work, the next target, the next threat, the next piece of the broken world that needed to be cut away before it could infect anything else. He pulled the skull vest tighter across his chest, adjusted the trench coat, checked his ammunition, 42 rounds for the Beretta, 6 shells for the shotgun in his safe house, 2 blocks of C4 remaining. Enough. Always enough. He stepped off the rooftop, dropped to the fire escape, and descended into the city. 3 days later, an anonymous package arrived at UA High School's faculty office. No return address, no postage. It had been placed on the doorstep sometime during the night, bypassing every security system on campus, in a feat that made Nezu's fur stand on end. Inside was a flash drive. Nezu plugged it into an air-gapped computer and opened the single file. It was a document, a detailed intelligence report on the League of Villains. Names, locations, known associates, financial connections, quirk profiles, safe house addresses, communication protocols, supply chain routes for trigger distribution, and a single organizational chart that mapped the League's hierarchy from Shigaraki at the top all the way down to the street-level recruits. At the bottom of the document, one line: do your jobs. No signature. No skull. Just the demand. Eraserhead stared at the document for a long time. Then he looked at Nezu. He's not our enemy, Eraserhead said quietly. He's not our friend either, Nezu replied. He is what happens when the system fails a child, and that makes him our responsibility. Can we reach him? Nezu's black eyes, intelligent, calculating, and for once genuinely uncertain, blinked. I don't know. I don't know if there's enough of the boy left to reach. Eraserhead looked at the file again, at the intelligence report that must have taken months to compile, at the meticulousness, the precision, the sheer tactical genius of a 15-year-old who had outmaneuvered every criminal organization and every hero agency in the country. There's enough, Eraserhead said. He sent this. He didn't have to. He could have used this information himself, but he sent it to us, which means somewhere under all that, he still wants us to do better. Nezu tilted his head, or he's using us as another weapon in his war. Maybe both. They looked at each other, the principal and the teacher, the genius animal and the underground hero, two people who had dedicated their lives to the system, standing in a room where the system's greatest failure had just delivered them the tools to do their jobs better than they'd ever managed on their own. What do we do? Eraserhead asked. Nezu picked up the flash drive and held it between his paws. We do our jobs, he said, and we find the boy. But you can't find someone who doesn't want to be found. Izuku Midoriya moved through the world like a ghost, with no permanent address, no digital footprint, no relationships, no connections, no tethers that could be pulled to drag him into the light. He existed in the spaces between the hero world and the villain world, between the law and the lawless, between the boy he used to be and the thing he'd become. He was 15 years old. He'd killed 61 people. He'd dismantled 4 criminal organizations. He'd crippled the leader of the League of Villains. He'd executed the hero killer. He'd survived stabbings, shootings, beatings, explosions, and a concussive blast powerful enough to crack his body armor. And he was still going, because the mission never ended. There was always another target, another network, another pocket of rot in the system that needed to be carved out. The skull was never finished, because the darkness was never finished. It just changed shape, changed names, changed locations, but it was always there. And so was he. The hero world scrambled to respond. Nezu's intelligence report, the Punisher's intelligence report, led to a series of raids that resulted in 14 arrests and the seizure of 200 kilograms of trigger. It was the biggest bust in years. The media praised the heroes. The heroes took the credit. Nobody mentioned where the intelligence came from. But the heroes knew, and the villains knew. And the underground knew the Punisher was everywhere and nowhere. He was a force of nature that the hero system could neither control nor ignore. He was the skull in the darkness, the gunshot in the alley, the consequence that arrived when the system failed. And for the villains, for the criminals, for everyone who preyed on the weak and the helpless and thought they could do it forever, because the heroes were too slow or too careful or too bound by rules that only worked for people with power. For all of them, the message was clear. The heroes might forgive you, the system might fail you, but the skull never forgot. On a building in Camino Ward, 4 blocks from the group home he'd escaped 5 years ago, someone had painted a mural. It was 30 feet tall, stretching from the sidewalk to the roofline. On it was a skull, white on black, simple, stark, unmistakable. And underneath it, in letters that glowed faintly in the dark, someone had written 7 words. Not the hero we wanted, the one we needed. The city council tried to have it removed, twice. Both times it was repainted overnight. Nobody ever saw who did it. In the neighborhoods that the hero system forgot, people looked at that mural and felt something. Something complicated. Something that lived in the gap between safety and justice, between the law and what was right, between the world as it was and the world as it should have been. They didn't call him a hero. He wasn't one. They didn't call him a villain. He wasn't that either. They called him the Punisher. And in the dark of the city, in the alleys and the rooftops and the warehouse basements where the work was done, Izuku Midoriya kept moving, kept fighting, kept carrying the weight of a war that would never end, fueled by a grief that would never heal, driven by a mission that had no finish line. 1 batch, 2 batch, penny and dime. The flash drive changed the game, but not in the way Nezu expected. Within 72 hours, the intelligence Izuku had delivered to UA made its way through the Hero Public Safety Commission's chain of command. 14 arrests, 200 kilograms of trigger seized. 3 League of Villains safe houses raided simultaneously by coordinated hero teams. The media called it a breakthrough. The biggest anti-villain operation in a decade. But Nezu, small, white-furred, black-eyed, with a brain that could solve problems most humans couldn't even identify, sat in his office and looked at what the intelligence report actually said. Not the surface layer, not the names and addresses that made for good press conferences. The deeper layer. The one hidden in the data architecture itself, in the way the information was organized and presented. The report mapped the League of Villains from the bottom up. Street-level recruits at the base, mid-tier operatives in the middle, Shigaraki at the top. But the chart had a line extending above Shigaraki, a dotted line reaching upward to a blank space. And in that blank space, a single notation. Sensei, real name unknown, quirk unknown, location unknown. This is the actual threat. The heroes had celebrated the arrests. Nezu stared at the blank space above the chart and understood what the Punisher was telling them. You're fighting the fingers while the hand is still free. He called Eraserhead into his office that night, showed him the chart, showed him the blank space. He knows something we don't, Nezu said. Whoever this sensei is, the Punisher has been tracking them independently, and he's farther ahead than we are. Eraserhead leaned against the wall, still wrapped in bandages from USJ. His eyes, the only part of his face fully visible, narrowed. How far ahead? I don't know, and that's what worries me. We received this intelligence because he chose to give it to us, which means everything he kept, the information he decided we weren't ready for, is the real prize. So he's using us. He's pointing us in a direction. Whether that constitutes using depends on whether the direction is the right one. Eraserhead stared at the blank space on the chart, the dotted line extending into nothing, the word sensei hovering above Shigaraki like a shadow. It's the right direction, Eraserhead said quietly. I can feel it. Feelings don't constitute evidence, Eraserhead. No, but they constitute instinct. And my instinct says that kid has been fighting a war we haven't even recognized yet. And we're 3 moves behind. Nezu took a long sip of his tea. His eyes, those unsettling, hyper-intelligent eyes, blinked slowly. Then we'd better start catching up. They never caught up, because Izuku Midoriya was already hunting. The name had surfaced 6 weeks before he sent the flash drive, all for one. 3 words that turned up in whispered conversations at the edges of the criminal networks he'd been dismantling. A name that made hardened killers go pale. A name that trigger suppliers invoked the way medieval peasants invoked the plague, as something so vast and terrible that speaking it aloud felt dangerous. Izuku pulled the threads the way he always did, slowly, patiently, one informant at a time. One broken bone at a time. A trigger courier in Yokohama mentioned a shipment that came through channels he'd never seen before. Military-grade logistics, the kind of supply chain that required institutional backing. The courier didn't know where it came from. He just knew it was different. Izuku broke the courier's arm in 2 places. The courier suddenly remembered more details. A transfer point in Camino Ward. A warehouse that processed trigger using equipment that wasn't available on the black market. Equipment that had been stolen from a government laboratory 3 years ago. Security that was heavier than anything a simple drug operation would warrant. A week later, Izuku intercepted a League of Villains communication relay, a dead drop system using coded messages left in specific public locations. Low-tech. Old school. The kind of system someone with decades of experience would design, because digital systems could be hacked, but a message written on a scrap of paper and tucked behind a loose brick in a train station wall was invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Izuku knew where to look. Because he'd been watching the League's foot soldiers for months, tracking their movements, mapping their routines, and he'd noticed that certain operatives made stops at locations that had nothing to do with their assigned routes. He found the dead drop locations. He read the messages. He put the pieces together. All for One was real. All for One was old. And All for One was running the League of Villains from somewhere in the Camino Ward, underground, pulling Shigaraki's strings like a puppet master who had been practicing for generations. The intelligence the heroes got on the flash drive was the bottom half of the picture. The half that would keep them busy while Izuku worked the top half on his own. Because Izuku trusted the hero system to do exactly one thing: fail. And the closer they got to All for One, the more likely they were to spook the target and lose him forever. The enforcer showed up on a Wednesday. Izuku was 3 blocks from one of the dead drop locations, conducting surveillance from a condemned building on the 7th floor when his perimeter alarm, a simple tripwire connected to a tin can filled with ball bearings, rigged across the stairwell 4 floors below, went off. The rattling sound echoed up the concrete shaft like a handful of coins dropping into a metal bucket. He was already moving, Beretta drawn. He crossed the empty floor in 4 steps and pressed himself against the wall beside the stairwell door. Listened. Footsteps. Heavy. Confident. One person. The door opened. The man who stepped through was enormous, 6'5", 260 pounds, dressed in a black suit that strained across his shoulders. His head was shaved. His face was a roadmap of scar tissue. His quirk was visible. His forearms were covered in a dark, metallic sheen, like iron had grown through his skin. He saw Izuku at the same moment Izuku saw him. The man smiled. It was the smile of someone who had been sent to do a specific job and was confident in his ability to do it. "The Punisher," the man said. His voice was deep. "I was told you'd be hard to find. Took me 9 days." "That's 9 days longer than you had left," Izuku said. The man's smile widened. "My name is Tetsuya Kuro. I represent certain interests that would prefer you stop breathing. Nothing personal." "Everything I do is personal." Kuro moved first. Fast for his size, the iron-coated forearms came up in a guard position as he closed the distance in 2 strides. He threw a straight right that would have caved in a concrete wall. The air displaced by the punch moved Izuku's hair. Izuku ducked it by an inch. He fired the Beretta point-blank into Kuro's midsection. The round hit the iron skin and ricocheted off, sparking against the metal surface. Kuro's entire torso was armored. The quirk wasn't just his forearms, it was everything. Kuro's left hand caught the Beretta and crushed it. The frame crumpled in his grip like aluminum foil. He tossed the ruined gun aside and swung again, a backhanded strike that Izuku barely avoided by throwing himself backward. The concrete wall behind where Izuku's head had been exploded inward. Dust and debris filled the air. Izuku rolled, came up in a crouch, and assessed. Iron skin. Full body coverage. Bullets bounce off. Overwhelming strength. Standard approach. Head, throat, eyes, joints. The weak points in any hardened defense. He drew his combat knife. 8 inches of hardened steel. It wouldn't penetrate iron skins, but that wasn't what it was for. Kuro charged again. Izuku sidestepped, grabbed the edge of Kuro's jacket, and used the big man's momentum to redirect him into the stairwell doorframe. Kuro hit it hard enough to bend the metal frame. He pushed off, barely phased, and came back swinging. Izuku took 1 hit. The iron fist connected with his left side, just below the ribs. The body armor absorbed some of it, not enough. He felt something crack. Pain shot through his torso like an electric current. He staggered. Kuro pressed the advantage. 2 more swings. Izuku dodged the first, caught the second on his forearm, the armor plate built into his sleeve, and felt the bone bruise through the padding. He was losing the stand-up fight. The man was too strong, too durable. So Izuku changed the fight. He dropped to the ground. Deliberately. Kuro reached down to grab him, and Izuku drove the combat knife into the gap between the man's shoe and his ankle. The blade punched through leather, through sock, through the thin skin where the iron coating didn't reach, because quirks that coated the body in armor almost always had gaps at the joints. Knees, ankles, the insides of the elbows. The spaces where the body needed to flex, Kuro screamed. Blood poured around the blade. He staggered back, the knife still embedded in his ankle joint, his stance broken, his balance shifted. Izuku was already on his feet. He grabbed the ruin of a concrete block, jagged, heavy, the size of a brick, from the debris of the wall Kuro had destroyed, and swung it into the side of Kuro's head. The impact sounded like a bell being struck with a hammer. Kuro's iron skin protected him from cutting damage, but the kinetic force traveled through. Concussion didn't care about armor. Kuro's eyes went glassy. He swayed. Izuku hit him again, same spot. The concrete block shattered. Kuro dropped to one knee. Izuku reached down, yanked the combat knife out of Kuro's ankle, and drove it into the man's left eye socket. The iron skin didn't cover the eyeballs. Nothing covered the eyeballs. Kuro's body went rigid. Then it went slack. He toppled sideways and hit the floor with a sound like a car being dropped from a crane. Izuku stood over him, breathing hard, ribs screaming, left arm going numb, blood from the ankle wound pooling around his boots. He searched the body. In Kuro's inner jacket pocket, he found a phone. A burner. Cheap, prepaid, the kind you bought at a convenience store. Izuku powered it on. One contact in the address book, one text message thread. The messages were coded, but the code was simple, a word substitution cipher that Izuku cracked in his head in under a minute. The last message read, "Target located, 7th floor, condemned building, block 14, awaiting confirmation." The reply sent 40 minutes ago read, "Eliminate, confirm with photo, report to secondary location, Camino Underground, sublevel 3, section 7. Camino Underground, sublevel 3, section 7. Izuku stared at the phone. Then he pocketed it, wiped the knife on Kuro's suit, and sheathed it. The enforcer had given him something better than a kill. He'd given him an address that led down, into the underground, into the dark place where All for One lived. He pulled the knife from Kuro's eye. Wiped it again. He didn't look at the body as he walked out. He never looked at the bodies anymore. The safe house burned on a Friday night. Izuku's current base was a converted storage unit in the basement of a condemned apartment complex in Musutafu's industrial fringe. He'd been there for 11 days, longer than he usually stayed anywhere. He'd set it up the way Sato had taught him. Multiple exit points, weapons cached at 3 locations within the space, early warning systems at every approach, a go bag packed and ready at all times. He was sitting on a crate, field stripping the replacement Beretta he'd acquired after Kuro crushed the old one when the first warning tripped, a motion sensor on the north stairwell. 3 seconds later, the second warning, south entrance. Then the east fire escape. 3 entry points, simultaneous. They were professionals, not street thugs, not quirk-using amateurs. Professionals. Coordinated breach, multiple angles, designed to cut off escape routes. Izuku was off the crate and moving before the third alarm finished buzzing. He grabbed the go bag, a compact rucksack containing ammunition, medical supplies, cash, a spare pistol, and a set of forged identification documents. Slung it over one shoulder. Picked up the sawed-off shotgun from the wall mount, a Remington 870 with the barrel cut down to 14 inches, loaded with slugs, the stock replaced with a pistol grip, then the power went out. Total darkness. They'd cut the building's electrical feed. Smart. The abandoned complex had no backup generator. The basement was windowless. Without the single work light Izuku had rigged, the space was pitch black. But Izuku had planned for this. He had always planned for this. The night vision monocle was in his left cargo pocket. He pressed it to his eye and the world turned green and grainy. 6 figures coming down the north stairwell, moving in a tactical column. Body armor, face masks, weapons up. 4 more from the south entrance. 2 on the fire escape, setting up what looked like an incendiary charge. 12 shooters, full kit. Sent to kill the Punisher in his own safe house. The incendiary charge detonated. The east wall erupted in a wall of orange flame that raced across the ceiling, consuming the exposed insulation and old wiring. Within seconds, the basement was filling with smoke. The temperature spiked. The fire was accelerant-based, thermite or magnesium, designed to burn fast and hot to turn the basement into an oven. They wanted to flush him out, drive him toward the stairwells. Into their kill zones, Izuku went the other way. He kicked open the grate covering the building's abandoned utility tunnel. a narrow concrete shaft 4 feet high, 3 feet wide, originally designed for maintenance access to the plumbing and electrical systems. He'd mapped it on day one, memorized every turn, every junction, every spot where the tunnel widened or narrowed. He crawled into the tunnel, pulling the grate closed behind him. 30 seconds later, the breach team reached the basement and found it empty. Just fire, smoke, and the ghost of a man who was already somewhere else. But Izuku didn't leave. The utility tunnel ran the length of the building. It connected to other tunnels, other access points, other sections of the complex. A rat's maze of concrete passages that a kill team couldn't sweep without splitting up. Izuku reached a junction and stopped, listened. Above him, boots on concrete, radio chatter, muffled by the floor. The team was sweeping the basement, looking for a body or a blood trail. They wouldn't find either. He turned left at the junction, followed the tunnel for 40 feet, reached a vertical access shaft, a rusted ladder leading up to the building's ground floor. He climbed. The ground floor was a ruin. Abandoned apartments, doors hanging off hinges, walls tagged with graffiti, floors covered in debris. The fire below was starting to eat through the basement ceiling. Smoke was pouring up through the gaps in the floorboards. The building had maybe 10 minutes before structural failure. Izuku emerged from the access shaft into a hallway. 2 of the kill team were at the far end, covering the stairwell. Their backs were to him. He raised the sawed off. The blast in the enclosed hallway was enormous. The slug caught the first shooter in the back of the head, and the contents of his skull painted the wall in front of him. The second shooter spun, weapon coming up, and Izuku racked the slide and fired again before the man completed his turn. The slug hit him in the throat and nearly took his head off. 2 down, 10 remaining. The sound of the shotgun echoed through the building. The kill team knew where he was now. Radio chatter erupted. Frantic, overlapping voices, commands being shouted. Izuku moved, fast, down the hallway, through a doorway, into a burned-out apartment. The floor was treacherous, rotten boards, exposed nails, gaps where the basement fire was visible below. He crossed the room in 3 strides, kicked out the window, and dropped onto the fire escape. 2 shooters on the ground outside, covering the east side. They saw him on the fire escape and opened up. Bullets sparked off the metal railing. Izuku fired the sawed-off downward. The slug hit the concrete next to the closer shooter, and the ricochet and fragmentation caught him across the legs. He went down screaming. The second shooter adjusted his aim. Izuku dropped flat on the fire escape landing, letting the rounds pass over him, then rolled off the edge. He fell 1 story, hit the dumpster below, rolled off it, and landed in a crouch. The impact rattled his already bruised ribs. He tasted copper. The second shooter was 10 feet away, reloading. Izuku closed the distance in 2 steps. He didn't shoot. He grabbed the man's rifle by the barrel with his left hand, paid, shoved it sideways, and drove the butt of the sawed-off into his face. Nose, cheekbone, and orbital socket collapsed under the impact. The man dropped. Izuku stomped on his throat, a wet crunch. Silence. 4 down, 8 remaining. He circled the building. The fire was growing. Flames were visible through the ground floor windows now, orange light flickering against the night sky. Smoke poured from every opening. The building groaned. Metal stressed. Concrete cracked. 2 more shooters came around the corner of the building, moving in a tactical pair. Izuku was pressed against the wall in a shadow they hadn't cleared. He let the first one pass, grabbed the second one from behind, left arm around the throat, right hand on the chin. Twist. The neck snapped with a sound like a dry branch. He lowered the body and used it as a shield when the first shooter turned and fired. 3 rounds hit the dead man's body armor. Izuku fired the sawed-off over the corpse's shoulder. The slug caught the shooter in the chest and threw him backward 4 feet, 6 down, 6 remaining. Inside the building, the remaining team members were pulling back. The fire was too hot. The structure was compromised. They'd lost contact with half their people. The mission was blown. Izuku didn't let them retreat. He re-entered the building through a ground floor window on the west side. The heat hit him like a physical wall. The smoke was thick enough to chew. He pulled a cloth over his mouth and nose and moved through the burning hallway, the sawed-off empty now, both hands on the replacement Beretta. A shooter emerged from the smoke, coughing, disoriented. Izuku put 2 rounds through his face mask. The man dropped into the flames. Another came from a side room. Izuku heard the door before he saw the figure. He fired through the wall, 3 rounds spaced across the width of a human torso. A body hit the floor on the other side, 8 down, 4 remaining. He found 2 of them in the stairwell, trying to reach the ground floor. They were on the landing above him, descending. Izuku stepped into the stairwell below them and looked up. The smoke gave him a second of concealment. He fired 4 times. Both men tumbled down the stairs and landed at his feet. The ceiling above him groaned. A section of plaster fell, trailing fire. The building was dying, 2 remaining. He found the last 2 at the north exit. They were outside. Running. Smart. The building was collapsing behind them, the mission had failed, and they were doing the only rational thing: getting distance. Izuku stepped out of the north exit behind them. 50 feet of open ground between him and the 2 fleeing shooters. He raised the Beretta, took a breath, let it half out, squeezed. 1 shot. The shooter on the right pitched forward and skidded across the pavement, adjusted. Squeezed again. The shooter on the left spun, clutching his neck, and collapsed. 12 down, 0 remaining. Behind Izuku, the building folded. 3 stories of condemned apartment complex buckled inward, the fire eating through the last of its structural supports. The collapse sent a pillar of flame and dust into the night sky that was visible for miles. Izuku stood in the light of the fire. His face was blackened with soot. His ribs ached. His lungs burned. A cut across his forehead dripped blood into his left eye. He looked at the burning building. Everything he'd stored there was gone. Weapons, ammunition, intelligence files, maps, hard drives, all of it. 5 months of accumulated resources turned to ash. He blinked, adjusted the go bag on his shoulder, walked away. 3 hours later, he was in a new location, a rented garage in the Shizuoka prefecture, paid for 6 months in advance under a false name. He spread his remaining supplies on the floor. 1 Beretta, 3 magazines, 1 combat knife, 1 set of body armor damaged, medical supplies, cash. The burner phone from Kuro's body. He cleaned the Beretta, treated his injuries, butterfly stitches on the forehead cut, compression wrap on the ribs, disinfectant on the burns, changed into fresh clothes, black tactical pants, black shirt, the skull vest which he'd been wearing under the go bag. He sat on the concrete floor, leaned against the wall, closed his eyes. The fire team meant All for One knew about him, knew he was getting close. The enforcer had been the warning shot. The fire team was the follow-up. The next step would be worse. Good. Izuku opened his eyes, picked up Kuro's phone, read the address again, Camino Underground. Sublevel 3, Section 7. He memorized it, destroyed the phone, started planning. The Camino Ward operation happened 3 weeks later. 3 weeks of preparation. 3 weeks of surveillance, equipment acquisition, route mapping, and contingency planning. 3 weeks of the most intensive operational work Izuku had done since the Crimson Chain compound. He'd acquired new hardware through his remaining black market contacts, a scramble that cost him most of his cash reserves and every favor he'd accumulated in the underground. New Berettas, 2 of them, matching. A tactical shotgun, an M4 carbine, body armor, upgraded with ceramic inserts rated for rifle rounds. Grenades, fragmentation, flashbang, and a fresh supply of homemade thermite charges. Breaching charges, a new combat knife, enough ammunition to sustain a 30-minute engagement against a fortified position. He needed every piece of it. The Camino Underground was a network of bunkers and tunnels beneath the Camino Ward Industrial District, a leftover from a construction project that had been abandoned decades ago when the developers went bankrupt. The tunnels had been used by various criminal organizations over the years, but in the last 3 years, one section had been quietly reinforced, expanded, and converted into something much more sophisticated. Izuku had spent 2 weeks mapping the surface entrances. He'd identified 4. A service tunnel disguised as a utility access point, a freight elevator in the basement of an abandoned factory, a drainage pipe wide enough for a person to crawl through, and a concealed entrance in the sub-basement of a bar that served as a League of Villains front. He chose the drainage pipe. The least obvious approach, the least monitored, and the one that connected directly to the lower levels where Kuro's phone had indicated the target was located. The heroes were coming too. Izuku knew this because he'd been monitoring Hero Agency communications through a police scanner he'd modified to pick up the encrypted frequencies used by the Hero Public Safety Commission. The heroes had pieced together enough intelligence, some from Izuku's flash drive, some from their own investigations, to identify the Camino Underground as a League of Villains stronghold. A joint task force was assembling. Pro-heroes from multiple agencies, coordinated by the HPSC, they were planning a raid. Timeline, 48 hours. Izuku went in 24 hours early. At 2:15 a.m. on a morning, he lowered himself into the drainage pipe in a construction yard 6 blocks from the Camino Underground entrance. The pipe was 3 feet in diameter, tight concrete, slick with moisture. He crawled on his elbows and knees, the go bag dragging behind him for 400 meters. The pipe opened into a junction chamber, a wider space where multiple drainage lines converged. From here, a maintenance corridor led deeper into the tunnel network. Izuku followed it, moving in total darkness with the night vision monocle pressed to his eye. The first guards appeared at the entrance to the reinforced section. 2 men armed sitting on folding chairs beside a steel door. Bored. Complacent. They'd been guarding an entrance that nobody was supposed to know about. Izuku came out of the dark hallway like something from a nightmare. The suppressed Beretta coughed twice. Both guards slumped in their chairs. He moved their bodies, checked the door, electronic lock, keycard access. He took the keycard from the nearest dead man's pocket and swiped it. The door opened. Beyond it, the Camino Underground was larger than the surface suggested. A complex of rooms, corridors, and chambers carved into the earth and reinforced with concrete and steel. Dim fluorescent lighting, the hum of generators, the distant sound of machinery. Izuku moved through it like smoke through a building. Room by room, corridor by corridor, guards fell before they knew he was there. The suppressed pistol did the close work. The knife did the silent work. He was a ghost with a body count, passing through the underground like a dark tide. The first significant chamber he found was a laboratory. Medical equipment, examination tables with restraints, cold storage units filled with biological samples, and in the center of the room, 3 glass-walled chambers containing Nomu, bioengineered weapons, brains exposed, bodies twisted by artificial quirk grafting. Izuku looked at them, at their empty dead fish eyes, at the exposed brain tissue pulsing faintly, at the scars covering their bodies from the modifications that had been forced on them. They were people once. Before All for One turned them into weapons, he set thermite charges on each containment unit, wired them to a remote detonator, moved on. The second chamber was a server room, rows of computer equipment humming and blinking in the cold air. Izuku didn't understand all of it. He was a killer, not a hacker, but he recognized data storage when he saw it. He pulled every hard drive he could carry and shoved them into his bag. Whatever was on those drives, the heroes would want it. Or he would. The third chamber stopped him cold, a cell block, small rooms with barred doors like a prison. Most were empty. 2 were occupied. In the first cell, a man sat on a bare concrete floor. He was naked, emaciated, covered in scars. His eyes were open but empty. His mouth moved, forming words that had no sound. Whatever had been done to him, whatever quirks had been forced into or out of his body, had left him a hollow thing. In the second cell, a woman. Same condition, scars, hollow eyes, the remnants of a person who had been used as raw material for someone else's experiments. Izuku stared at them through the bars. His face showed nothing. His eyes showed nothing. But his hands, gripping the bars of the cell door, were white at the knuckles. He broke the locks, both cells, opened the doors. "Can you walk?" he asked the man. The man looked at him, through him. No recognition, no response. Izuku crouched beside the woman. Same result. Whatever awareness they'd once had was gone. He lifted the woman over his shoulder, grabbed the man's arm, and pulled him to his feet, supporting his weight. They were light, barely there, just skin and bones and ruined nerves. He carried them both, through the corridors, past the dead guards, back toward the drainage pipe. He made it 200 meters before the alarm went off. Klaxons screamed through the underground. Red lights strobed. The sound of boots, many boots, echoed through the tunnels. Someone had found the bodies. The complex was going into lockdown. Izuku couldn't fight while carrying 2 people. He set them down in a side corridor, positioned them against the wall, and turned to face the tunnel. 6 guards rounded the corner, weapons up, moving in a loose formation. They saw the skull vest and hesitated. 1 second. 1 second of recognition, of processing, of fear. Izuku used that second. The Beretta barked 6 times. 4 guards dropped. The 5th caught a round in the shoulder and staggered. The 6th threw himself flat and opened up on full auto. Bullets chewed into the concrete wall next to Izuku's head. Dust and chips of concrete peppered his face. He grabbed a fragmentation grenade from his vest, pulled the pin, and rolled it down the corridor. It bounced off the wall, ricocheted toward the prone shooter, and detonated. The blast in the enclosed tunnel was devastating. Concrete cracked. The fluorescent lights shattered. The shooter ceased to exist as an organism. Izuku scooped up the 2 prisoners again and kept moving. He reached the drainage pipe, set the prisoners down, triggered the remote detonator for the thermite charges in the Nomu lab. Deep underground, 3 containment chambers ignited. 4,000 degrees of white fire consumed the Nomu, the equipment, the biological samples, everything. The heat was so intense it cracked the concrete walls. The Nomu didn't scream. They were already too far gone for that. Izuku pushed the prisoners into the drainage pipe, followed them, crawled 400 meters through the dark with 2 barely conscious bodies, dragging them by their clothing, the sound of alarms fading behind him. He emerged into the construction yard. The night air hit his face. Cool. Clean. He gasped. He called an ambulance from a payphone 2 blocks away, gave the location, hung up before they could trace the call, left the 2 prisoners propped against a wall where they'd be found. Then he climbed to a rooftop 6 blocks east and set up surveillance. He had front row seats when the heroes arrived 24 hours later. The Camino raid was everything the Hero Public Safety Commission had planned and nothing it expected. The Joint Task Force, a dozen pro-heroes, led by Best Jeanist, with Endeavor, Edgeshot, Mount Lady, and others in support, breached the Camino underground through the primary entrances. They expected resistance. They expected the League of Villains. They expected Shigaraki. They found bodies. Dead guards lying where Izuku had left them. Burned out chambers. Missing hard drives. Empty cells with broken locks. And they found All for One. He was waiting for them. Not in the underground. Above it. Standing on the roof of a collapsed building in the Camino Ward Industrial District, silhouetted against the sky, wearing a black suit and a featureless face mask that covered the ruined mess where his features should have been. All for One. The symbol of evil. The man who had collected quirks for generations. The architect of every major villain organization in Japan's modern history. The puppet master who had created the League of Villains, engineered the Nomu, groomed Shigaraki, and orchestrated a century of shadow warfare against the hero system. He looked at the assembled heroes the way a man looks at ants. How disappointing, he said. His voice was calm. The voice of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall and found none of them impressive. I expected all might. I got the understudies. Best Jeanist attacked first, his fiber manipulation quirk lashed out, threads of clothing whipping toward All for One with enough force to restrain a giant. All for One raised one hand. A shockwave erupted from his palm. A stolen quirk, one of hundreds, compressed air released at a velocity that turned atmosphere into a weapon. The shockwave shredded the fibers and hit Best Jeanist in the chest. The hero flew backward. Body armor crushed, ribs shattered, and hit the ground 300 feet away. He didn't get up. One attack, one of Japan's top heroes removed from the fight, the remaining heroes engaged. Edgeshot, the foldable hero, compressed his body into a razor-thin blade and tried to pierce All for One's vitals. All for One caught him with a secondary quirk, some kind of impact nullification, and swatted him aside like a fly. Mount Lady grew to maximum size and threw a punch that could have leveled a building. All for One caught her fist with one hand and used another stolen quirk to redirect her mass, sending her crashing into the industrial district like a 40-foot rag doll. Izuku watched from the rooftop 6 blocks away. Binoculars pressed to his eyes. Breathing steady. He saw the heroes fall. He saw the power differential. He saw the truth that the hero system was about to learn the hard way. Some things were beyond them. And then All Might arrived. Izuku saw him before the cameras did. A blur of red and blue descending from the sky, hitting the ground in front of All for One with an impact that cracked the earth. The symbol of peace in his true form, skeletal, hollow, a ghost wearing a costume 3 sizes too big, standing between All for One and the fallen heroes. The smile was there, even now, that absurd, impossible, All Might smile. "I am here," All Might said. All for One laughed. "Yes, you are, barely." They fought. Izuku watched the entire thing. He didn't move from his position. He didn't intervene. This was beyond his reach. 2 beings with power on a scale that transcended human engineering is clashing in the ruins of Kamino Ward with enough force to reshape the geography. All Might's punches distorted the air. All for One's stolen quirks combined and recombined in combinations that defied logic. The ground cratered. Buildings fell. The shockwaves from their impacts shattered windows for blocks. And through it all, Izuku watched with a flat, empty expression that had become his permanent mask. He didn't root for All Might. He didn't hope for All for One's defeat. He observed. He cataloged. He filed away every detail of both combatants' fighting styles, power outputs, and tactical decisions. Because information was ammunition, and Izuku Midoriya never stopped loading, the fight ended the way it had to end. All Might poured everything, every last ounce of One for All, every drop of the fading power that had made him the symbol of peace, into a final punch. United States of Smash, the newscasters would call it later. A blow that carried the weight of an era behind it. All for One went down. The villain's body cratered the earth. He lay in the rubble, broken, defeated, consciousness fading. All Might stood over him. His muscle form deflated. The enormous frame shrank. What remained was a skeleton in a costume, Toshinori Yagi, the man behind the myth, standing in front of every camera in Japan with nothing left to hide behind. He raised his fist, one last time, pointed at the cameras, at the world. "You're next," he said. The final words of the symbol of peace. A warning, a promise, and a goodbye. 6 blocks away, Izuku lowered his binoculars. He watched Toshinori Yagi, the man who had told a crying boy that he couldn't be a hero, stand in the ruins of his own legend, empty, finished. Izuku felt nothing. He folded the binoculars, packed his bag, stood up. The symbol of peace was gone. The hero system would reel. The power vacuum would be enormous. Villains would surge. Fear would spread. Everything would change. Everything except the mission. Izuku descended from the rooftop and vanished into the Kamino Ward night, stepping through the smoke of All Might's last battle like it was just another alley in just another city where someone had to do the work the heroes couldn't. 1 batch, 2 batch. The war continues. All Might's fall broke the world's spine. Within a week, every metric the Hero Public Safety Commission tracked went red. Villain activity spiked by 300%. Petty crime, muggings, theft, vandalism exploded in districts that hadn't seen trouble in years. Organized crime syndicates that had been laying low since the Punisher's rampage started resurfacing, emboldened by the absence of the one deterrent that had kept them in check for decades. The heroes scrambled. Endeavor, now the #1 hero by default, a position he'd wanted his entire life and now wore like a crown made of razors, held a press conference. He promised stability, he promised strength, he promised that the hero system would endure. Nobody believed him. Even Endeavor didn't believe him. You could see it in his eyes. The gap between the title and the reality, between the position and the man who held it. For the students of UA, the fall of All Might was an earthquake. They'd grown up in his shadow. They'd built their ambitions on the foundation he represented. And now the foundation was gone and they were standing on air. Bakugo processed it the way Bakugo processed everything. With rage. He trained harder, pushed himself further, blew up training dummies until his palms bled. He refused to talk about All Might's retirement. He refused to talk about the Punisher. He refused to talk about the quirkless ghost with green hair who had done more damage in a single year than most heroes did in a career. But at night, alone in his dorm room, Bakugo Katsuki lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about what it meant that the world's strongest hero was gone and the most dangerous person in Japan was a kid his age who didn't have a quirk at all. It meant something he didn't want to name. So he didn't. Todoroki was quieter about it. He'd watched the Kamino broadcast like everyone else. The whole fight, start to finish. He'd seen All Might fall. He'd seen the ruins. And he'd noticed something the cameras missed. A brief flash on a rooftop 6 blocks east of the battle, so brief it might have been a reflection, a glint of glass. Binoculars, he mentioned it to Eraserhead. Eraserhead's expression told him everything he needed to know. He was there, Todoroki said. I don't know what you're talking about, Eraserhead replied, which was the closest thing to a confirmation Todoroki had ever gotten from the man. Uraraka cried. She cried for All Might. She cried for the symbol he represented, and she cried for something else, something she didn't fully understand and couldn't put into words. A feeling that the world was splitting into two halves, and that the half with the skull painted on it was getting bigger every day. Ida said nothing at all. He'd been quiet since Hosu, since the alley, since the Punisher had looked at him and said, "Don't throw that away by becoming like me," since the gunshot that ended Stain's life 3 feet from where Ida lay on the ground. He kept those words inside him like a splinter under the skin. He felt them every day. He would feel them for the rest of his life. And in the dark spaces of the city, in the alleys, the basements, the abandoned buildings and condemned lots, Izuku Midoriya continued his war. The League came for him 3 weeks after Kamino. Shigaraki was different now. The arrest of All For One, his sensei, his mentor, the only person who had ever made him feel like he mattered, had shattered whatever fragile equilibrium had kept his madness in check. He was harder, colder, more focused. The scratching had stopped. His neck was raw, scabbed, but the compulsive behavior had been replaced by something worse. A stillness, a purpose. The Punisher burned our lab, Shigaraki told the assembled League. They were in a new hideout, a converted office building in a dead commercial district. Dabi leaned against the wall, blue flames flickering idly around his fingertips. Toga sat cross-legged on a desk, spinning a knife on her finger, grinning. Twice fidgeted, his split personalities arguing in whispers. Mr. Compress stood in the corner, mask gleaming, silent and attentive. Spinner, Magni, Mustard, the newer recruits, drawn to the League by Stain's legacy and the chaos of All Might's fall. He killed our guards, Shigaraki continued. He destroyed our Nomu, he stole our data, and he walked out alive. Pause. That's over. Find him, kill him, bring me the skull vest. They went hunting. All of them. Spread across the city like wolves searching for a single specific scent. Toga found him first. She was good at finding people. Her obsession with blood made her a tracker. She could smell it, sense it, follow the faintest trace of it through a crowd or down a street. And the Punisher bled. Everybody bled, eventually, and the Punisher bled more than most because he lived in the space where bleeding was inevitable. She found a droplet. Just one, on a rooftop in the Shinjuku district where Izuku had treated a minor wound 48 hours earlier. She traced it to a fire escape. From the fire escape, she followed the trail, not blood anymore, but patterns. The Punisher moved in ways she'd learned to predict. He favored certain types of buildings, certain heights, certain sight lines. She found him in a condemned parking garage on the 4th level. He was sitting against a pillar, checking his ammunition. The skull vest was visible in the dim light filtering through the concrete. Toga dropped from the level above, silent, blade in each hand. She landed 10 feet behind him and lunged. Izuku heard her. He heard the displacement of air, the whisper of clothing, the soft thud of shoes hitting concrete. He rolled sideways and came up in a crouch. Toga's blade passed through the space where his neck had been and buried itself in the concrete pillar. She yanked it free, grinning. Her eyes were wide. Her cheeks were flushed. She looked at the skull vest the way a predator looks at something it wants to consume. "I found you," she breathed. "I found you, I found you, I found you. You're even more beautiful up close. All that blood, all that pain. I just want to..." Izuku shot the knife out of her left hand. The Beretta barked once, the round hitting the flat of the blade and sending it spinning across the garage. Toga yelped, fingers stinging. She lunged with the other blade. Fast! Toga was genuinely fast, her small frame and manic energy giving her a speed that surprised people who underestimated her. The blade slashed at Izuku's chest. He caught her wrist, twisted it, and the knife clattered to the ground. He spun her, cranked her arm behind her back, and slammed her face first into the pillar. Her forehead hit the concrete with a crack. She went limp for a second, dazed, the grin finally gone, replaced by confusion. Izuku zip-tied her wrist to a pipe running along the pillar, then the other wrist. She was pinned, facing the wall, arms spread. She turned her head, blood running from a cut on her forehead where she'd hit the concrete. The grin came back. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked, almost hopeful. "You're not worth the bullet," Izuku said. He picked up both her knives, snapped the blades, and dropped the pieces at her feet. Then he walked away. Behind him, Toga started laughing, a high, bright, unhinged sound that echoed through the empty garage. "Then I'll find you again," she called after him. "I'll find you, and I'll cut you open, and I'll wear your face, and I'll—" The sound of his boots fading into the dark cut her off. She was left there, zip-tied to a pipe, bleeding from the head, laughing to herself. A patrol hero found her 2 hours later. Twice was next. Jin Bubaigawara, the man behind the Twice mask, found Izuku's trail in the Musutafu warehouse district. He'd been using his double quirk to blanket the area with copies of himself, a human surveillance network that could cover more ground than any single tracker. One of his clones spotted the skull vest moving through an alley at 3 a.m. Twice, all of him, every copy, converged. Izuku turned a corner and found the alley full of them. Dozens of Twice copies, all identical, all masked, all pointing at him. "There he is," they shouted in unison. "Get him! Wait! Should we get him? Yes! Yes! Definitely yes!" Izuku assessed. The Twice copies were fragile. One solid hit, and they dissolved into goo. The problem was volume. There were at least 30 of them, and they were blocking both ends of the alley. He drew both Berettas. The copies charged. What followed lasted about 45 seconds and sounded like a popcorn machine in a tornado. Izuku put his back to the alley wall and fired in both directions simultaneously, each Beretta tracking separate targets. The copies dissolved on impact. One shot, one gone. They popped and splashed like water balloons filled with gray mud. They kept coming. More copies pouring into the alley from the streets on either side. Izuku reloaded, magazines out, magazines in, slides racked. In under 2 seconds, muscle memory so deep it was closer to reflex than thought, he moved forward through the dissolving copies, stepping over puddles of gray residue, firing steadily. The Berettas barked in alternating rhythm. Left, right, left, right. Each shot erased a copy. The alley was a mess of gray slush and the acrid smell of dissolved biomass. The real Twice was on a rooftop above, directing the flood. He watched the Punisher walk through his army like a man walking through rain, steady, unhurried, unstoppable. That's insane, Twice muttered. "He's so cool." "No, he's not. He's terrifying." "Both." Izuku looked up, saw the real one, raised a Beretta. The round hit the rooftop ledge an inch from Twice's face. Concrete chips peppered his mask. Oh, crap. Twice ran, full sprint, away from the edge, across the rooftop, down a fire escape on the far side. He ran 6 blocks without stopping. Behind him, the last of his copies dissolved. Izuku stood alone in the alley, surrounded by gray puddles, smoke rising from both Beretta barrels. He holstered the weapons, wiped the goo off his boots, kept moving. Dabi was the problem. Tuya Todoroki, though nobody in the league knew that name yet, was the most dangerous of Shigaraki's operatives. His cremation quirk produced blue flames that burned hotter than any natural fire, hot enough to melt steel, hot enough to reduce a human body to ash in seconds. He was also smart. Smarter than Toga, smarter than Twice. He didn't charge in or try to overwhelm with numbers. He studied. He watched. He waited. He waited for 3 days. Then he cornered Izuku in the Musutafu Industrial District in a narrow passage between 2 concrete buildings. A dead end. 20-foot walls on 3 sides, open on only one. Izuku was halfway down the passage when the blue flames erupted. A wall of fire sealed the open end of the passage. Floor to ceiling, wall to wall, burning blue-white. The temperature in the passage jumped 30 degrees in a second. 40. 50. The concrete walls started to glow. Dabi stepped through his own flames, unbothered by the heat. He was lean, scarred, held together by staples and spite. His turquoise eyes found the skull in the firelight. "So you're the big, bad wolf," Dabi said. "Gotta say, I expected more." Izuku turned to face him. The passage was 30 feet long. Dabi was at the mouth. The dead end was at Izuku's back. Walls on both sides, too high to climb. The flames behind Dabi made retreat impossible, a kill box. A perfect one. "You know what I think?" Dabi continued, raising one hand. Blue flames danced across his fingertips. "I think you've been lucky. I think you're good at killing people who are surprised and scared, but you've never fought fire before, not like mine." Izuku looked at the walls, at the ground, at the distance between them. "You talk too much," he said. Dabi fired. A lance of blue flame shot down the passage like a blowtorch the size of a car. It hit the dead-end wall and detonated, the superheated air expanding outward in a shockwave that set the passage ablaze. Izuku dropped flat a half-second before the lance reached him. The flames passed over his body, the heat searing through his clothes, blistering the exposed skin on the back of his neck. He rolled to the left wall, pressing himself into the narrow gap where the wall met the ground. The gap was 6 inches. Just enough. A second lance of flame raked the passage. Dabi was walking forward, burning everything, turning the concrete passage into a kiln. The air itself was becoming toxic, superheated, oxygen depleted, filling with carbon monoxide. Izuku had seconds. He reached into his vest. Not for a gun. For the breaching charge he'd been carrying since the safe house, a shaped explosive the size of a playing card designed to punch through walls and doors. He slapped against the base of the left wall. Pressed the detonator. Covered his head, the charge blew a hole in the concrete wall the size of a manhole cover. Behind it, the interior of the adjacent building. An empty manufacturing floor, dark and cool. Izuku rolled through the hole as the third lance of flame scorched the spot where he'd been lying. He was through, inside the building, the heat already dropping. But Dabi followed. Blue flames melted the edges of the hole wider, and the scarred villain stepped through, hands raised, grinning. Running? The big bad Punisher runs? Izuku shot him in the knee. He'd drawn the Beretta the instant he was through the wall, aimed from a prone position on the factory floor, and fired before Dabi finished his sentence. The round hit the side of Dabi's left kneecap. Bone cracked. Blood sprayed. Dabi screamed, a sharp, ugly sound, and stumbled. His flames guttered. That was the thing about fire quirks. They required focus. Pain disrupted focus. And a shattered kneecap was about as painful as the human body could experience without losing consciousness. Dabi fired back, a wild blast of blue flame that went wide, hitting a support pillar and setting it ablaze. The factory floor lit up in flickering blue light. Izuku was already on his feet. He circled right, keeping distance, keeping the ruined machinery between himself and Dabi. The factory was full of abandoned equipment, stamping presses, conveyor frames, tool racks, steel and iron and concrete, things that didn't burn easily. Dabi dragged himself upright, favoring his destroyed knee. His face was a mask of pain and fury. The staples on his face glinted in the firelight. You think a bullet stops me? You think? Izuku shot his other knee. Dabi went down. Both legs useless. He hit the factory floor and his flames erupted in a directionless burst. A scream of fire that scorched the ceiling, set the walls ablaze, turned the entire factory into a burning cage. The fire spread fast. The building was old, full of oil residue and dust and decades of accumulated combustibles. Within 30 seconds, the entire space was an inferno. Izuku could feel his skin tightening from the heat. His lungs burned. The oxygen was being consumed faster than it could be replaced. He walked toward Dabi. The villain was on the floor, crawling, dragging himself by his hands, leaving a trail of blood. His flames were still going, blue fire erupting from his body in spasms, feeding the inferno. Stay back, I'll burn you, Izuku kicked him in the face. Dabi's head snapped sideways. The flames flickered. Died. Izuku grabbed him by the collar of his coat and dragged him across the factory floor toward the loading dock door. The building was collapsing around them, ceiling beams falling, walls buckling, the roar of the fire drowning out everything. He kicked the loading dock door open. Night air rushed in. He dragged Dabi through and dumped him on the pavement outside. Dabi lay there, both knees destroyed, face bleeding, semi-conscious. His flames were out. Without focus, without strength, without the ability to stand, he was just a scarred kid in a trench coat lying in a puddle of his own blood. Izuku looked down at him. Tell Shigaraki something for me. Dabi's eyes focused. Barely. Tell him every person he sends, I'll send back broken. And when I run out of people to break, I'll come for him. Again. He left Dabi on the pavement and walked away from the burning factory. The flames reflected off the white skull on his chest. Behind him, the building collapsed in on itself, with a sound like the world cracking open. The League fractured. Toga was in custody. Twice was in hiding, terrified, his clones refusing to go near any district where the skull had been spotted. Dabi was in a villain safe house, both legs in splints, unable to walk, unable to fight, cursing the Punisher's name with every breath. Shigaraki sat in his chair in the League's hideout and scratched his neck until it bled. The stillness was gone. The purpose was shaking. Mr. Compress stood beside him, his mask hiding whatever expression he wore. "We cannot beat him through direct engagement," Compress said carefully. "He is more capable than our individual operatives, and he knows our tactics better than we know his." "Then what do you suggest?" Shigaraki snarled. Compress said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The Punisher was a problem that the League of Villains, in its current diminished state, was fundamentally unable to solve. Shigaraki scratched until blood ran between his fingers. The skull could not be killed. The overhaul intelligence came from the hard drives. Izuku had been processing the data he'd stolen from the Kamino Underground for weeks, working through encrypted files on a second-hand laptop in his new safe house. Most of it was League business: communication logs, financial records, personnel files. Useful, but expected. One file was different: a correspondence between All for One's network and a Yakuza boss named Kai Chisaki, alias Overhaul. The correspondence outlined a partnership. Chisaki would supply the League with a weaponized drug capable of permanently destroying quirks in exchange for the League's support in re-establishing the Yakuza's dominance over the criminal underworld. The drug was called quirk-destroying bullets. The raw material for the drug was a girl. Izuku read the file 3 times. A girl named Eri, age 6. Quirk. Rewind. The ability to reverse a person's body to a previous state. Chisaki was harvesting her, taking her apart with his own quirk, Overhaul, which allowed him to disassemble and reassemble matter at will. He would disassemble Eri's body, extract the components necessary for the drug, and then reassemble her so the process could be repeated. Over and over. A child being taken apart and put back together like a machine being stripped for parts, living through every disassembly, feeling every reassembly. Trapped in a cycle of destruction and reconstruction that never ended, because her body was the product line, and a product line doesn't get to stop. Izuku closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a long time. Something shifted behind the mask. Deep. In the place where the 10-year-old boy used to live, where the memory of his mother's voice still echoed, where the last remnants of the person he'd been before the war still existed in a locked room he never opened. A child. In the dark. Being hurt. While the system looked the other way, he opened the laptop again, started planning. The heroes knew about Overhaul, too. Izuku picked this up from the encrypted police frequencies. A joint operation between Sir Night Eye's agency and the Hero Public Safety Commission was being assembled. They'd identified the Shi Hasaikai compound. They knew about the drug. They suspected, but couldn't confirm, the existence of a child being held against her will. Their timeline was cautious. Weeks of surveillance, careful legal groundwork, warrants, jurisdictional coordination, risk assessments. The careful, deliberate, procedural approach that the Hero system used for every major operation. Izuku's timeline was faster. He went in on a Thursday night, alone. 3 days before the Hero's planned breach date. The Shi Hasaikai compound was a fortress. Located beneath a traditional Japanese estate in the Musatafu suburbs, it extended underground in a labyrinth of corridors, chambers, and sealed rooms. The architecture was a blend of traditional Yakuza construction and modern security. Reinforced walls, electronic surveillance, blast doors, and multiple choke points designed to slow down any attacker. Chisaki had also modified the compound with his quirk. The walls, floors, and ceilings were all subject to his control. He could reshape them at will, creating barriers, traps, or weapons from the building itself. Izuku knew this. He'd studied Chisaki's quirk from every available source. He understood the limitations. Chisaki needed to touch something to overhaul it. Range was limited, and most importantly, the modifications required concentration, which meant combat was a distraction. He entered through the sewage system. The compound's waste processing connected to the city's sewer network through a series of pipes and junction boxes that the Shi Hasaikai's security team had locked and monitored. Izuku bypassed the locks and disabled the monitors with a portable signal jammer. He crawled through 300 meters of pipe that reeked of chemicals and human waste, emerged in a utility room in the compound's lower levels, and began. The first guard died quietly. A hand over the mouth, a knife across the throat. The body slumped against the wall. Izuku took his radio. The second guard died the same way. And the third. Silent. Efficient. The knife was a better tool than the gun in these tight, echoing corridors, where a gunshot would bring every Yakuza enforcer in the compound running. He moved deeper. The layout matched the blueprint he'd constructed from the Camino data and his own surveillance. A series of concentric rings with Chisaki's inner sanctum at the center and layers of security radiating outward. The fourth ring was where it got ugly. The Shi Hasaikai's 8 expendables, a unit of loyal soldiers who served as Overhaul's first line of defense, were stationed here. 8 quirk users, each one dangerous, each one positioned in the corridors like pieces on a chessboard. The first expendable Izuku encountered had a quirk that let him blend into the walls. A camouflage ability that made him nearly invisible against the compound's gray concrete surfaces. Izuku didn't see him. He felt him, a slight change in the air current, a displacement that didn't match the corridor's geometry. He fired the Beretta into the wall 2 feet to his left. The round hit the camouflaged man in the stomach. He materialized, screaming, and fell from the wall like a spider that had been flicked off a countertop. Izuku shot him twice more before he hit the floor. The noise brought the second expendable, a big man with a crystal generation quirk. He could grow jagged crystalline spikes from his body and launch them like projectiles. The corridor filled with a hail of razor-sharp crystals. Izuku dove behind a support column. Crystals shattered against the concrete, sending fragments everywhere. One caught his left forearm, slicing through the sleeve and into the muscle. Blood welled. He ignored it. He pulled a flashbang, popped the pin, and threw it around the column. The detonation blinded the crystal expendable. Izuku came around the column and emptied half a magazine into him. The crystals on his body shattered as he fell. Third expendable. Fourth. Fifth. Each one different, each one a unique quirk that required a unique approach. One could harden his body into stone. Izuku shot out his eyes, the only soft point. One could extend his limbs like rubber. Izuku waited until the arm was stretched, then severed it at the elbow with the combat knife. One could create barriers of compressed air. Izuku threw a grenade over the barrier and let the shrapnel do the work. 5 expendables down. 3 remaining, plus an unknown number of regular Yakuza guards. The 6th expendable was the worst. His quirk let him manipulate the density of objects he touched, increasing them to 10, 20, 50 times their normal weight. He touched the floor in front of Izuku, and suddenly the concrete under Izuku's boots weighed tons. Izuku's legs buckled. His knees hit the ground. The weight pressed down on him like a giant hand. He couldn't move forward, couldn't stand. The expendable was walking toward him, smiling, reaching out to touch him directly. One touch and Izuku's body would become so heavy his own bones would snap. Izuku shot him in the hand. The reaching hand, 2 feet from his face. The round punched through the palm and the expendable recoiled, his concentration breaking. The density effect vanished. Izuku was on his feet instantly. He closed the gap before the expendable could reset. 3 strikes. Knife to the throat, knee to the groin, elbow to the temple. The man dropped. The 7th expendable tried to ambush him from a side passage. Izuku heard the footsteps and shot through the wall without looking. The body hit the floor on the other side. The 8th expendable was smart enough to run. Izuku let him go. He was past the outer defenses now. The inner sanctum was ahead, a sealed blast door that led to Chisaki's personal quarters and laboratory. Behind the blast door was Eri. He planted breaching charges. 4 of them, positioned at the door's hinge points and locking mechanism. Wired them to a simultaneous detonator, stepped back. The blast blew the door inward. Izuku followed it through the smoke, weapons up, moving fast. The laboratory was a nightmare. Medical equipment, surgical tools, restraint tables with straps sized for a child, vials of blood, Ares blood, arranged in neat rows in a refrigeration unit. The floor was clean, the lights were bright, and the sterile emptiness of the space was somehow worse than any gore. Eri was in the corner. She was small, so small. White hair. A small horn on her forehead, bandages covering her arms and legs. She was sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up to her chest, her red eyes wide and terrified. She'd heard the explosions. She'd heard the fighting. And now a man in a skull vest was standing in the doorway of her cell with blood on his hands and guns on his belt. She flinched. Something happened behind Izuku's eyes. A crack, small, deep, in the wall he'd built between himself and everything he used to feel. He lowered his weapons, crouched down, made himself smaller. Hey, his voice was different. Still rough, still low, but the edge was dulled. The blade was sheathed for the first time in 5 years because the person in front of him was 6 years old and terrified, and he was not going to be another thing she was afraid of. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "Nobody is going to hurt you again." Eri stared at him. Her eyes were the eyes of a child who had stopped believing that anything good was possible. Izuku recognized those eyes. He'd seen them in the mirror. "My name is Izuku," he said, "and I'm going to get you out of here." The floor shifted. The concrete beneath Izuku's feet rippled like water, then erupted upward. A spike of reconstructed stone shot toward his chest. He threw himself backward, the spike passing an inch from his body armor and landed hard on his back. Chisaki walked through the far wall. He didn't open a door. He didn't come through a hallway. He touched the wall and it parted for him, the concrete reshaping around his body like liquid, then sealing behind him. He stood in the laboratory in his green bomber jacket and his plague doctor mask, his golden eyes flat and contemptuous above the beak. "An intruder," Chisaki said. His voice was clipped. "In my clean room, contaminating everything." Izuku was already on his feet. The Beretta was up, aimed at Chisaki's head. "Step away from the girl, Chisaki." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Chisaki touched the floor. The concrete surged. A wall erupted between Izuku and Eri, cutting them off. Then the walls on either side began to close, the corridor narrowing, the ceiling lowering. The entire room was becoming a weapon. The floor buckled and spiked, the walls pressed inward. Chisaki was reshaping the space around Izuku like a fist closing around an insect. Izuku fired. 3 rounds at Chisaki. The wall in front of Chisaki rose to intercept, a concrete shield, raised and hardened in the fraction of a second between trigger pull and impact. The rounds buried themselves in stone. The ceiling dropped. Izuku dropped with it. Flat on the ground, the concrete passing over him with inches to spare. He rolled, came up in a new corridor that Chisaki had created by reshaping the laboratory into a maze. "You're in my world now," Chisaki said. His voice came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. The entire compound was an extension of his body. "Every surface is mine. Every wall, every floor, every atom of matter in this building obeys me." A spike shot from the wall to Izuku's left. He dodged. Another from the right. He dodged again. A third from the floor directly beneath him. This one caught his leg, the stone edge slicing through his pants and into his calf. Blood poured. Izuku gritted his teeth. The maze was closing around him. The corridors shifted, twisted, rearranged. Chisaki was hurting him, pushing him into a space with no exit, no cover, no escape. The combat knife was useless against stone. The Beretta was useless if Chisaki could raise walls faster than bullets traveled. The grenades, Izuku had 2 fragmentation grenades left, but detonating them in an enclosed, shifting space was as likely to kill him as Chisaki. Think. Chisaki's quirk required touch. He had to be touching something to reshape it, and his reshaping was focused. He couldn't modify the entire compound simultaneously. When he raised a wall in one place, his attention was there. Somewhere else was undefended. Izuku stopped running. He planted his feet, pressed his back against a wall, and listened. The compound hummed with Chisaki's modifications, concrete grinding, steel bending, the whole structure alive with his quirk. There, to the left, a section of wall that wasn't moving, wasn't changing. Chisaki's attention was elsewhere, reforming the corridor ahead, building the kill box. Izuku drove the combat knife into the stationary wall, levered it. Concrete cracked. He dug his fingers into the gap and pulled. A chunk of wall came free. Behind it, a service duct. Dark, narrow, leading away from the maze. He squeezed through. The duct ran behind the laboratory walls, a maintenance passage, too small for Chisaki's modifications to reach effectively without collapsing the surrounding structure. Izuku crawled through it, blood from his leg wounds smearing on the concrete, until the duct opened into a junction box. He was behind Chisaki. Through a gap in the wall, he could see the villain standing in the center of the laboratory, one hand on the floor, the other raised, directing the maze. His back was exposed. His attention was forward, focused on the kill box he was building for a target who was no longer there. Izuku didn't hesitate. He burst through the wall. The concrete panel shattered outward. Chisaki spun, golden eyes going wide. The first genuine surprise the man had shown. Izuku was already on him. He tackled Chisaki at the waist, driving him backward, away from any surface he could touch. They hit the examination table, steel, bolted to the floor, and Izuku slammed Chisaki's back onto it. Chisaki's hands reached for the table. If he touched it, he could reshape it into a weapon. Izuku grabbed both his wrists. They struggled. Chisaki was strong, not combat-trained, but desperate, and his quirk made him confident enough to resist. His fingers strained toward the metal surface, inches away. If he touched it, even for a second, Izuku headbutted him. Full force. Forehead to nose, the same way he'd broken Stain. Chisaki's mask cracked. Blood sprayed. His concentration shattered. Izuku pinned Chisaki's right hand against the table with his knee. With his free hand, he drew the combat knife and drove it through Chisaki's left palm, pinning it to the metal surface. Chisaki screamed. His quirk activated reflexively. The table beneath his pinned hand started to reshape, the metal warping. But the pain was too much, the focus too scattered. The reshaping sputtered, failed. Izuku hit him again, fist to the jaw. Again. Chisaki's head bounced off the metal table with each impact. His golden eyes rolled. His body went limp. Izuku grabbed the knife handle and twisted it. Chisaki screamed louder. The quirk tried to activate again. Izuku felt the table shiver beneath his knees. He pulled the knife free, grabbed Chisaki's other hand, and broke his fingers, one by one. Each snap was deliberate. Each break was positioned to maximize nerve damage. When he finished, Chisaki's hands were ruined. Fingers bent at wrong angles, bones visible through split skin. The overhaul quirk required fine motor control, the ability to touch and manipulate matter with precision. That precision was gone. Chisaki stared at his hands. His mouth worked. No sound came out. The shock was setting in. The realization that his quirk, the thing that made him powerful, the thing that made him overhaul, was destroyed. "You're done," Izuku said. He left Chisaki on the table, moved to the wall that separated him from Eri. Without Chisaki's active control, the wall was just concrete, static, dead, breakable. Izuku planted his last breaching charge and blew it open. Eri was still in the corner, still curled up, still terrified. The compound shook. Above them, the sound of the ceiling beginning to give way. The structural modifications Chisaki had made during the fight had compromised the building's integrity. Without his quirk to maintain them, the changes were collapsing. Izuku scooped Eri up. She weighed almost nothing. She went rigid in his arms, a full-body flinch, every muscle locking, because the only arms that had ever held her in this place had hurt her. "I've got you," Izuku said. "Close your eyes." She closed her eyes. Her small hands gripped the collar of his skull vest. He ran, back through the maze, now crumbling, back through the corridors, now unstable. The ceiling dropped chunks of concrete. The walls cracked, the floor heaved. Izuku ran with Eri pressed against his chest, absorbing the impacts with his own body, shielding her from the debris with the curve of his torso. He reached the central corridor and found heroes. The Breach Team, Night Eye, Eraserhead, Fat Gum, Soon Eater, Rocklock, and a half-dozen sidekicks had entered the compound through the main entrance. They'd fought their way in, and now they were standing in the central corridor, staring at the Punisher running toward them with a child in his arms and a building collapsing behind him. Lemillion, Mirio Togata, the third-year student with the permeation quirk, was at the front. He saw Eri. His eyes went wide. Izuku didn't slow down. He reached Lemillion and held Eri out. She was still clinging to the skull vest. Izuku gently pried her fingers loose and placed her in Mirio's arms. "Get her out. Nothing else matters." Mirio looked at the skull vest, at the blood, the damage, the scar across the man's skull, at the green eyes that were looking at Eri the way someone looks at a reason. "Who are? Now!" Mirio ran, Eri in his arms, toward the exit, toward the light. Izuku turned back toward the collapsing compound. "Midoriya!" Eraserhead's voice. "Sharp! Stop!" Izuku looked at him, through him, past him. Chisaki's on an examination table in the back laboratory, both hands destroyed. He won't be using his quirk. 7 of his expendables are dead. 1 ran. He paused. "You're welcome." He disappeared back into the crumbling corridors. Eraserhead tried to follow. The ceiling collapsed between them, sealing the passage. By the time the heroes dug through, the laboratory was empty. Chisaki was there, on the table, hands ruined, staring at the ceiling in catatonic shock. The evidence was there. The vials, the equipment, the restraint tables. The Punisher was gone. 3 blocks away, in a sewer tunnel, Izuku sat against the wall, coughed blood. His ribs were cracked. At least 3, maybe 4. The leg wound was deep. His left eye was swelling shut from a piece of debris that had hit him during the escape. His hands were cut, his body was bruised, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. He pressed his back against the cold concrete. Closed his eyes. She was out. The girl was out. She was safe. Something in the locked room shifted, just for a second. A memory. Not his mother's voice. Something else. The memory of being small and scared and knowing that nobody was coming, and then the memory of being carried, being held. The feeling of arms that didn't hurt. He opened his eyes, checked his weapons, 1 Beretta, half a magazine, the combat knife, blood-stained. He stood up. The pain tried to keep him down. He ignored it. He'd been ignoring pain for 5 years. 5 more minutes was nothing. He limped through the sewer, toward the surface, toward the next safe house, toward the mission. Always the mission. Nezu found him on a rooftop in Yokohama. The principal of UA High School, 3 feet tall, white-furred, black-eyed, wearing a perfectly pressed suit, was sitting on an upturned crate beside an air conditioning unit with thermos of tea and 2 cups when Izuku climbed over the ledge at 2:47 a.m. Izuku's hand went to the Beretta. Fast. Automatic. Nezu didn't move. He sat perfectly still, the thermos balanced on his knee, his black eyes catching the ambient light of the city below. "Good evening," Nezu said. "I brought chamomile. I hope that's acceptable." Izuku scanned the rooftop, every corner, every shadow, every possible concealment point. "I'm alone," Nezu said. "No backup, no surveillance, no heroes waiting in the wings, just me, this tea, and a conversation I've been trying to have for quite some time." Izuku's hand stayed on the Beretta. His body was still healing. The ribs were taped, the leg wound was stitched and wrapped, the swelling around his eye had gone down, but the bruise remained. He looked like a person who'd been through a car crash and decided to keep walking. "How?" Izuku said. 1 word. "How did you find me?" "I didn't follow you. I didn't track you. You're quite good at being invisible." Nezu poured tea into both cups. The steam rose in the cold night air. "I followed your logic. Your target selection follows a pattern. You work the supply chains backwards, from the distributors to the manufacturers to the financiers. Your current intelligence leads point toward a cluster of financial connections in the Yokohama Port District. This building gives the best surveillance angle on 2 of those connections simultaneously." Pause. "I would have chosen this rooftop too." Izuku stared at him. The Beretta was still in his hand, but no longer aimed. A small, white-furred animal sitting alone on a rooftop with tea was not a threat profile his training had prepared him for. "You're either brave or stupid," Izuku said. "The line between the 2 is thinner than people think." Nezu held out a cup. "Sit down, please." Izuku didn't sit, but he didn't leave. Something about the absolute calm of the small figure on the crate, the complete absence of fear, the fact that Nezu had come alone to meet the most dangerous person in Japan with nothing but a thermos and a conversation. Nobody had ever done that. Nobody had ever looked at the skull vest and decided that a cup of tea was the appropriate response. "I know who you are," Nezu said. "Izuku Midoriya, born July 15th, Quirkless, son of Hisashi and Inko Midoriya, both deceased, survivor of the Naruhata massacre, missing since age 10, responsible for the deaths of over 70 confirmed criminals and the dismantling of multiple organized crime networks, known as the Punisher." He took a sip of tea. "I also know what happened to you. The massacre. The hospital. The group home. The 11 days you spent staring at a wall before you disappeared." His voice was gentle, steady. "I know where the system failed you. Every step, every missed intervention, every caseworker who didn't follow up, every hero patrol that was too thin, every policy that prioritized efficiency over compassion." Izuku said nothing. His jaw was tight. "I'm not here to arrest you," Nezu continued. "I'm not here to rehabilitate you. I'm not here to make you a hero or a student or anything else you don't want to be." "Then why are you here?" "Because someone should have been here a long time ago." Nezu's black eyes met Izuku's green ones. "And I'm sorry that they weren't." The silence that followed lasted 30 seconds. 30 seconds in which the city breathed below them and the wind moved across the rooftop and neither of them looked away from the other. Izuku felt something. It was small. Distant. Like hearing a sound through a very thick wall. You knew it was there, but you couldn't make out the shape of it. The locked room in his chest where the boy used to live shifted. A floorboard creaked. A door rattled in its frame. He shoved it down, buried it, locked it tighter. Sorry doesn't bring them back, Izuku said. No, it doesn't. Sorry doesn't fix the system. No. Sorry doesn't stop the next kid from lying in a puddle of his mother's blood while the heroes pose for cameras 4 minutes too late. Nezu set his tea down. His expression, always controlled, always pleasant, shifted. The cheerfulness fell away. What was left was something raw and real and old. The face of a creature who had been experimented on, who had been tortured, who understood suffering in a way that most people never would. You're right, Nezu said. Sorry is inadequate. The system that failed you is still failing others. I know this. I work within it every day and I see its cracks and I try to fill them and I know that I am often too slow and too careful and too bound by the rules that you have chosen to reject. He looked at Izuku without flinching. But I am here, sitting on this rooftop, because I believe there is a way to make the system better that doesn't require you to carry this war alone. And I believe that somewhere inside you, underneath everything, underneath the training and the kills and the grief, there is a person who wants to believe that too. Don't. Don't what? Don't talk about who I was. That kid is dead. Is he? Izuku's eyes flickered, just for a second. A tremor in the mask so brief that anyone else would have missed it. Nezu didn't miss it. You sent us the flash drive, Nezu said. You could have used that intelligence yourself. Every target on that list was within your capability. You sent it to us instead. And at the Shihasaikai compound, you could have extracted the girl yourself. You're capable of it. Instead, you handed her to a hero student and told him to get her out. Pause. A dead boy doesn't do that. Izuku's hand tightened on the Beretta. His knuckles were white. His breathing was controlled, but his pulse, visible in the vein at his temple, was elevated. You don't know me. I know you better than you think. I know that you clean your weapons the same way every time. Barrel first, then slide, then frame, because routine is a form of control. I know that you favor rooftops because they remind you of height, and height is the closest thing to safety your subconscious recognizes. And I know that you chose this rooftop because it faces east, and in 4 hours the sun will come up over the harbor, and you would have watched it. Because Izuku Midoriya used to take you to watch the sunrise at the Musutafu harbor when you were small, and even though you've tried to bury that memory along with everything else, your body still seeks the light. Silence. Long silence. Izuku stood on the rooftop with a gun in his hand and a hole in his chest that had been there for 5 years, and a small white animal had just reached into that hole and touched something that should have been dead. Get out, Izuku said. His voice was quiet, rough. I'm going to leave this on the crate. Nezu placed a small card, white, plain, with a phone number written in neat handwriting. It's a secure line, untraceable. If you ever need intelligence that your methods can't provide, information inside the hero system, data from the HPSCC, anything, this number reaches me directly. He stood up from the crate, brushed off his suit, picked up his thermos. I'm not asking you to stop, Nezu said. I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to consider that the war you're fighting might be more winnable with more information than you currently have access to. Izuku said nothing. The Beretta was at his side. Nezu walked to the roof access door. He opened it, paused. Your mother's nursery rhyme, Nezu said, without turning around. I found the original. She adapted it from an English counting rhyme. 1 a penny, 2 a penny, hot cross buns. She changed the words to make them yours. She wrote 6 different versions before she settled on the one she read to you. Izuku's breath caught, a tiny hitch, invisible to anyone who wasn't listening for it. She wrote them in a notebook that was recovered from your apartment after the fire. The notebook is in a police evidence locker in the Naruhata District Precinct, box 4471. If you want it, I suspect you know how to get into an evidence locker. The door closed behind Nezu. His small footsteps faded down the stairwell. Izuku stood alone on the rooftop. The card sat on the crate. White. Small. Fragile. He stared at it for a long time. Then he picked it up, held it between his scarred fingers, read the number. He put it in his pocket. He didn't use it. He didn't call. He didn't reach out. But he kept it. And on a rooftop in Yokohama, standing alone in the dark, the Punisher watched the sky above the harbor and waited for the sun. The final target took 3 months to identify. The chain started with the hard drives from Camino. It continued through the Shihasaikai's financial records, which Izuku had photographed during his infiltration. It extended through a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and political connections that reached deeper into Japan's power structure than anything Izuku had encountered before. The man at the top was not a villain, not in the traditional sense. He didn't wear a costume. He didn't have henchmen or a secret lair. He sat in boardrooms. He attended charity galas. He shook hands with politicians and smiled for cameras, and lived in a compound in the hills above Yokohama that looked like a luxury resort. His name was Takeshi Kuromura, 71 years old, chairman of the Kuromura Group, a conglomerate with interests in real estate, construction, shipping, and buried under 17 layers of corporate structure, organized crime. His family had been involved in the Yakuza since before the age of quirks, but Takeshi had modernized. He'd moved the family business out of the streets and into the shadows of legitimate commerce. He funded villain networks from a distance, using intermediary companies and untraceable financial instruments to supply organizations like the Crimson Chain, the Shihasaika, and dozens of others with the capital they needed to operate. He laundered money through hero agency sponsorships. He paid to have heroes on retainer who would look the other way when his operations needed room to breathe. He owned politicians who ensured that investigations into his businesses died in committee. He had never been in a room where violence happened. He had never given a direct order that could be traced. He was insulated by so many layers of deniability that the legal system couldn't touch him. He was, by every definition that mattered, untouchable. Izuku traced the chain back further, through the Crimson Chain's financial records, through the shell companies that had funded the turf war in Naruhara, through the payments that had put soldiers on those streets, through the orders that had started the fight, the order to escalate the Naruhara conflict, the order that turned a territorial dispute into an open war zone, the order that put quirk-using enforcers on the same streets where families were walking home from dinner, had come from Kuromura. Ryuji Tendo had been the field commander. He'd directed the soldiers. He'd run the operation. But the order, the original decision to go to war, to accept civilian casualties as an acceptable cost of territorial expansion, had been Kuromura's. Tendo was dead. The soldiers were dead. The organization was destroyed. But the man who started it all, the man whose signature on a financial document had set in motion the chain of events that killed Hisashi and Inko Midoriya, was sitting in his compound drinking scotch, untouched. Not for long. Izuku spent 3 days watching the compound. He set up surveillance positions on 3 different elevations surrounding the estate, rotating between them to avoid pattern detection. He used a long-range directional microphone to monitor conversations through windows. He tapped the compound's external communications using a hardware intercept he'd placed on a telephone junction box half a mile from the property. The compound's security was professional. 24 guards rotating in 3 8-hour shifts, 8 on duty at any time. Armed, handguns and batons, no heavy weapons visible. 4 external camera positions with overlapping fields of view. Motion sensors along the perimeter wall. A reinforced gate with a vehicle barrier. 2 guard dogs, Dobermans, trained, kenneled near the main entrance. Inside the compound, Kuromura kept a small personal staff. A driver, a cook, a housekeeper, and a personal bodyguard. The bodyguard was the only one who concerned Izuku. A former pro hero, retired, deregistered, but still dangerous. His quirk was a sensory enhancement. He could detect heartbeats and body heat through walls within a range of approximately 30 meters. That was the problem. Getting past the external security was straightforward. Getting past a man who could hear your heartbeat through concrete was harder. Izuku solved it with pharmacology, a beta blocker, propranolol specifically, would lower his heart rate to a level that the bodyguard's quirk would have difficulty distinguishing from background noise. Izuku had used the technique before during the Crimson Chain operation. Combined with a thermal dampening underlayer beneath his body armor, a thin, insulated material that reduced his infrared signature, he could get within the bodyguard's detection range without triggering an alarm. He prepared. 3 days of surveillance, 1 day of equipment preparation, 1 night of rest, 6 hours, which was the most he'd slept in a single stretch in months. He went in on the 4th night. The approach was from the north. The compound backed against a forested hillside. The perimeter wall was 8 feet high, topped with broken glass set in concrete. No cameras on the north face. The hillside was considered a natural barrier. It wasn't. Izuku scaled the wall using a pair of climbing hooks, custom-made, rubberized for silent contact. He cleared the broken glass by laying a folded section of body armor panel across it and rolling over. He dropped into the compound grounds and crouched in the shadow of the wall. The propranolol was already in his system. His heartbeat was 60 beats per minute, falling toward 50. Barely distinguishable from the ambient noise of the compound's heating system, he moved across the grounds. The thermal underlayer kept his body temperature signature low. He avoided the camera positions he'd mapped. He moved between the blind spots, timing his crosses to the rotation schedule he'd memorized. The first guard was at the northeast corner of the main building. Standing post, bored, scrolling through his phone. Izuku came up behind him like a shadow and put him down with a sleeper hold. Arm across the throat, compression of the carotid arteries, unconsciousness in 4 seconds. He zip-tied the guard's wrists and ankles, gagged him, and moved on. The second guard was on a roving patrol. Izuku tracked his route from the shadows, waited for the turn that put the guards back to him, and repeated the process. Silent. Clean nut, he reached the main building's service entrance. Locked, electronic keypad. He'd observed the code during surveillance, watching through the directional mic's paired camera as guards punched it in. 4 digits. He entered them. The door clicked open. Inside, the building was quiet, expensive wood floors, art on the walls, the smell of sandalwood and leather. The home of a man who had bought his comfort with blood money and never lost a night's sleep over it. Izuku moved through the ground floor. The cook and housekeeper were in the staff quarters, asleep. No threat. The driver was off-site. The bodyguard was the priority. He found him in the hallway outside Kuromura's private wing. Sitting in a chair, eyes closed, but not asleep, Izuku could see the slight movement of the man's head, the subtle tilt that indicated he was using his quirk. Scanning the building's heartbeat signatures, the propranolol kept Izuku's signal low. But at this range, 10 feet, even a suppressed heartbeat might register. Izuku had planned for this. He'd placed a small device outside the building earlier, an oscillator, battery-powered, designed to produce a rhythmic vibration at approximately 55 beats per minute. The vibration traveled through the building's structure, ascent, creating a false heartbeat signal that would muddy the bodyguard's detection. The bodyguard frowned, tilted his head. The extra signal was confusing his quirk. 2 faint heartbeats where there should be one. He stood up, hand going to the radio on his belt. Izuku was already there. The suppressed Beretta coughed once. The round hit the bodyguard in the back of the head. He dropped. The radio clattered on the hardwood floor. Izuku caught the body before it hit the ground. Lowered it gently, quietly. He took the bodyguard's radio and earpiece, listened. Static. No alarm. The hallway led to a set of double doors. Oak, heavy, ornate. Behind them, Kuromura's private study. Izuku opened the doors. The study was a beautiful room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with first editions and leather-bound volumes. A massive desk of dark wood. A fireplace currently lit, casting warm orange light across the Persian rug. 2 leather armchairs. A bar cart with crystal decanters. And at the window, looking out at the city lights below, a glass of scotch in his hand, Teshi Kuromura. He was exactly what his photos showed. 71. Silver-haired. Well-built for his age. A face that belonged on a magazine cover. Distinguished, composed, the kind of face that projected authority and trustworthiness. He wore a cashmere robe over silk pajamas. His feet were in leather slippers. He turned when the doors opened. Saw the skull vest, the Beretta, The green eyes, he knew. The glass of scotch trembled in his hand, just barely, a micro-tremor, the first crack in a lifetime of composure. "I see," Kuromura said. His voice was steady. "Almost. So you've come. You knew I would. I hoped you wouldn't." Kuromura set the glass down on the windowsill, slowly. "But I've been watching the news for the past year, watching you work your way up the ladder. Tendo, the Crimson Chain, the Hasai Kai. And I thought, if he's thorough enough, eventually he'll find the rung I'm standing on. You should have run. Run where? I'm 71 years old. I've run this empire for 4 decades. I'm not going to spend my last years hiding in some foreign country, waiting for a boy in a skull vest to find me." He turned fully to face Izuku. His eyes, dark, intelligent, calculating even now, studied the figure in the doorway. "You're younger than I expected," Kuromura said. "How old are you?" 16. 15. 15. Kuromura shook his head. "A 15-year-old child who has killed more people than most professional assassins manage in a career. The world produces remarkable things. The world produced you. That's why I'm here." Kuromura looked at the Beretta, at the skull, at the scar on Izuku's temple. "Naruhata," he said. It wasn't a question. "Naruhata." Silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the compound, a guard made a radio check that went unanswered. "I didn't know there would be civilian casualties," Kuromura said. "That wasn't the plan. The plan was a show of force, pressure the rival faction into negotiations. The fighters were supposed to stay in the commercial district. The residential blocks were, my mother burned to death on the sidewalk." Kuromura closed his mouth. "My father's body was in pieces in the street. His face was still there. He looked surprised, like he didn't understand what had happened to him." Izuku's voice was flat, quiet, the same dead tone he always used. "I was 10 years old. I held my mother while she burned, and I burned my hands trying to save her, and I couldn't. She was trying to say a nursery rhyme. She died before she finished it." Kuromura's composure cracked. The mask of the boardroom executive, the charity patron, the untouchable power broker, it fell away. What was underneath was an old man standing in his study in his pajamas, looking at the consequence of a decision he'd made 5 years ago. "I'm sorry," he said. "That word means nothing." "Then what can I? Money. I can give you money. Whatever amount you... No. Information. Names. I have connections to... I have all of your connections. I've had them for weeks. Every shell company, every politician, every dirty hero on your payroll. I've already sent it all to people who will use it." Kuromura's face went white. "You? What? What? The intelligence is already in the system. By tomorrow morning, the HPSC will have warrants. By next week, your empire will be a crime scene. Every bank account frozen, every asset seized, every person who helped you will be facing charges." Izuku raised the Beretta. "But that's the system's job. This is mine." Kuromura looked at the gun. The final seconds of a man's life have a specific quality, a clarity that strips away everything extraneous and leaves only the truth. Kuromura's truth was written on his face. Regret, but the wrong kind. He didn't regret the harm. He regretted getting caught. "You think killing me changes anything?" Kuromura said. His voice was quieter now, resigned. "There are 100 men like me. 1,000. The system doesn't run on people. It runs on money and power. Kill me and someone else fills the chair by next quarter. Maybe, but they'll sit in that chair knowing what happened to you. And they'll think twice before they give an order that puts children in a war zone." Kuromura looked into the green eyes across the room. Empty. Flat. The eyes of a weapon. And somewhere behind them, buried under 5 years of blood and training and mission, the ghost of a boy sitting on a subway with his parents, wearing an All Might t-shirt, asking 100 questions, the happiest kid in the world. "You took everything," Izuku said. I'm not here for money," said. "I'm not here for a deal. I'm here because it ends tonight." Bang! Teishi Kuromura's body fell back against the window. The glass cracked but didn't break. He slid down it, leaving a smear of red on the surface, and settled into a seated position on the floor. His eyes were open. His expression was surprise. They always looked surprised. Izuku stood in the study. The fire crackled. The smell of cordite mixed with sandalwood. Outside, the city glittered. He holstered the Beretta, looked around the room, at the books, the art, the expensive furniture, the trappings of a life built on the backs of people who would never sit in a room like this. He pulled a spray can from his coat. White paint. He walked to the wall behind Kuromura's desk and painted the skull. Clean lines. Simple. The same skull he'd been leaving at every scene since the first night. He set the spray can on the desk. He walked to the window, looked down at the compound grounds, the unconscious guards, the dark hillside, the city beyond. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the detonator. He'd placed the charges during his approach. 6 blocks of C4 positioned at structural points throughout the compound, the library foundation, the main hall supports, the underground garage pillars. Enough to bring the building down. He pressed the button. The compound shuddered. The floor tilted. The bookshelves groaned and toppled. The fire in the fireplace guttered as the chimney cracked. Izuku walked out through the study's emergency exit, a reinforced door that led to an exterior staircase on the compound's face. He descended as the building folded behind him. The sound was enormous. Steel bending, concrete shattering, 4 decades of blood money collapsing into rubble. He reached the perimeter wall, climbed over, walked into the forest. Behind him, the Kuromura compound was a pile of smoking debris. The fire from the study fireplace had found the ruins and was beginning to spread, orange light flickering through the gaps in the wreckage. Izuku walked through the trees. The hillside was dark. The air smelled like pine and smoke. And for the first time in 5 years, the specific grief, the one that had started in the Naruhata district on an October night, the one that had driven every bullet and every blade and every mile of the war, went quiet. Not gone. It would never be gone. The hole where his parents had been would never fill. The sound of his mother's voice would never fully return. The surprise on his father's face would never stop burning behind his eyes in the moments between sleep and waking. But the chain was complete. The man who started the fire was dead. The soldiers who carried it out were dead. The organizations that profited from it were destroyed. The intelligence that would finish the legal work was in the hands of people who would use it. The war wasn't over. The war would never be over. There would always be another target, another network, another piece of the darkness that needed cutting away. But this war, the personal one, the one that started with a 10-year-old boy holding his burning mother on a sidewalk, was done. Izuku emerged from the forest onto a road. The city was below him, spread out like a circuit board, millions of lights in the pre-dawn dark. He could see Yokohama Harbor. He could see the faint glow of Musutafu on the horizon. He could see the world that had taken everything from him and given him nothing in return except the will to fight. He walked down the road toward the city, toward the next safe house, toward whatever came next. In his pocket, a small white card with a phone number written in neat handwriting. On his chest, the skull. In his memory, a nursery rhyme. 3 days later, the news broke. The arrest warrants hit like a bomb. 47 individuals, ranging from corporate executives to sitting politicians to 3 active-duty pro-heroes, were named in a sweeping corruption and organized crime indictment filed jointly by the National Police Agency and the Hero Public Safety Commission. The charges included money laundering, conspiracy, aiding and abetting villain activity, and accessory to murder. The connection to Takeshi Kuromura, found dead in the ruins of his compound, cause of death, single gunshot wound to the chest, was made public within hours. The Kuromura Group's financial records, leaked to the press by an anonymous source, revealed a web of corruption that reached into every level of Japanese society. The hero world convulsed. 3 pro-heroes, 2 of them ranked in the top 50, were stripped of their licenses and arrested on live television. A sitting member of the Diet resigned. The chairman of a major hero agency sponsor was found dead in his office, an apparent suicide with a confession letter on his desk. And on every news channel, on every social media platform, on every street corner where people gathered to talk about what was happening, the same image kept appearing. A white skull, spray-painted on the wall of a ruined study, visible through the rubble. The debates raged louder than ever. But underneath the noise, something had shifted. Something fundamental. The hero system had been forced to confront its own rot. Not because a hero had exposed it, not because a journalist had uncovered it, but because a 15-year-old boy with no quirk and no faith in the system had done the work that the system refused to do. At UA, the faculty met behind closed doors. Nezu presented the intelligence he'd received, the final package, the one that had brought down the Kuromura Empire. He didn't say where it came from. He didn't need to. Eraserhead sat in his usual spot. Bandages mostly gone now, replaced by scars that would never fade. He listened to the briefing. He looked at the data. He thought about a 10-year-old boy with green hair and freckles and a smile that could fill up a room. Did he call? Eraserhead asked after the meeting. No, Nezu said. Will he? Nezu thought for a long time. I think he kept the card, Nezu said, and I think that's enough for now. In the dorms, the students of Class 1A carried the weight of a world that was changing around them. They trained, they studied, they prepared for a future that looked different from the one they'd been promised. Bakugo trained the hardest. He always did. But there was something different in his eyes now, a fury that had been refined, focused, sharpened by the knowledge that somewhere out there, a person without a quirk was fighting a war that the entire hero system had failed to win. He would never say it out loud. He would bite through his own tongue before he admitted it. But the Punisher had changed something in Bakugo Katsuki, had broken the fundamental assumption that had defined his entire life, that power was everything. It wasn't. Will was everything. And the Punisher had more of it than anyone alive. Todoroki thought about the skull vest in quiet moments, on rooftops, in hallways, in the spaces between classes where his mind wandered to the dark places that his father's abuse had carved out and the Punisher's existence had illuminated. A person who had suffered. A person who had chosen violence instead of heroism. A person who had looked at Todoroki and seen nothing worth stopping for. It bothered him. It would always bother him, and the bothering would make him better. Whether he understood that or not, Uraraka didn't talk about the Punisher. She didn't join the debates, she didn't wear the skull shirts that had become a counterculture phenomenon. But when she trained with a focus that her classmates noticed. A seriousness that hadn't been there before. She was building herself into something stronger, faster, more capable. And the reason, the one she kept locked inside her chest, was the memory of a figure in a skull vest who had walked into a nightmare and walked out the other side without breaking stride. If the system was going to survive, it had to be better. She was going to make it better. Person by person, save by save, until the gap between what heroes promised and what they delivered was small enough that no other child had to become what Izuku Midoriya became. And Ida. Tenya Ida, the boy who had lain on the ground of a Hosu city alley and begged the Punisher not to kill, carried those green eyes with him every day. He became class president. He became a leader. He became the kind of hero who showed up 4 minutes early instead of 4 minutes late. And every time he saved someone, every time he reached a scene before anyone else, every time his engine hins carried him to the place where he needed to be just fast enough, he thought about a voice in a dark alley saying, "Don't throw that away by becoming like me." He never threw it away. Far from UA, far from the debates and the press conferences and the sweeping institutional reforms that were beginning to reshape the hero system from the inside, Izuku Midoriya sat on a rooftop. A different rooftop. Different city. Shizuoka, an industrial district near the coast. The air smelled like salt and diesel fuel. Below him, the lights of the port district stretched toward the harbor, cranes and container ships silhouetted against the water. He'd been sitting here for an hour, cleaning his weapons. The Beretta came apart in his hands with the same practiced ease. Slide, barrel, recoil spring, frame. Each component wiped, inspected, reassembled. His body ached. The ribs were healing, but slowly. The leg wound had closed, but the scar was raw. The bruise around his eye had faded to yellow. He was 15 years old, and his body carried more damage than most soldiers accumulated in a 20-year career. He didn't think about Kuromura. The man was dead. That chapter was closed. He thought about his mother's notebook, box 4471, Naruhata District Precinct. Evidence locker. Nezu had told him where it was. The notebook where Inko Midoriya had written 6 different versions of a nursery rhyme until she found the one that made her son smile. He hadn't gone to get it. Not yet. He told himself it was because the precinct was well guarded, because breaking into an evidence locker was a risk without operational value, because the notebook was just paper and paper didn't change anything. He told himself a lot of things. The truth was simpler and harder. The notebook was the last piece of her he hadn't touched. The last thing that existed only as memory, untainted by the war, preserved in a box that he could choose to open or leave closed. And some part of him, the part that lived in the locked room, the part that remembered the feeling of her hand on his forehead when he had a fever, the part that could still hear the ghost of her voice, was afraid that opening the box would make it real, would make the grief concrete, would give it a shape he couldn't put away again. So he sat on the rooftop, and he cleaned his weapons, and he waited for the grief to become something he could carry. In his pocket, a white card. On his chest, the skull. In the distance, a siren wailed. The Port District, 3 blocks east. A sound that meant someone needed help, or someone was causing harm, or both. Izuku holstered the Beretta, stood up. The pain tried to keep him seated. He overruled it the way he overruled everything. With force, with will, with the absolute refusal to let anything other than the mission determine his next move. He pulled the skull vest tighter, checked his ammunition, 40 rounds for the Beretta, the combat knife freshly sharpened in its sheath, a single flashbang grenade clipped to his chest rig. Not a full loadout. Enough? Always enough. The siren was getting closer. Or maybe he was getting closer to the siren. The rooftop was 8 stories up. The fire escape descended to an alley that led to the Port District's main road. From there, 3 blocks east, to whatever was happening, to whoever was suffering, to the work that never ended. He walked to the edge of the rooftop, looked down. The city breathed beneath him, a living thing full of light and shadow, full of people who would never know his name and never see his face, and never understand the war that had been fought on their behalf by a boy who lost everything and turned the loss into a weapon. The hero world would keep turning. New heroes would rise. New villains would emerge. The system would evolve, slowly, imperfectly, dragged forward by the idealists who believed in it and the consequences that punished it when it failed. The reforms triggered by the Kuromura indictments would change some things. Not everything. Not enough. Nothing was ever enough. That was the fundamental truth of the work. The mission never ended because the darkness never ended. You could burn it back, you could cut it away, you could hold the line with bullets and blades and the sheer, grinding refusal to stop. But the darkness always came back, in new shapes, with new names, through new cracks in the system. And so the Punisher kept going, because someone had to. Because the people in the neighborhoods that heroes forgot deserved someone who showed up. Because the villains and the criminals and the monsters who preyed on the weak needed to know that the system wasn't the only thing watching. That beyond the law, beyond the heroes, beyond the rules that only worked for people with power, there was something else. A skull in the dark, a consequence with a gun. A boy who should have died on a sidewalk in Naruhata and didn't, and turned his survival into the most dangerous thing the world had ever seen. The hero world didn't get the symbol of peace anymore. Toshinori Yagi was retired, skeletal, teaching classes at UA with hands that used to reshape the weather and now struggled to hold a piece of chalk. The era of All Might was over. The era that replaced it was messier, harder, more honest about the gaps between promise and reality, and in those gaps, in the alleys and the rooftops and the spaces between the lights, the Punisher lived. Not a hero. Never a hero. Heroes smiled and posed and asked permission and worked within the rules. Izuku Midoriya did none of those things. He bled and killed and carried the weight of a war that had no victory condition and no exit strategy and no reward except the knowledge that someone, somewhere, would sleep safer tonight because a monster had been removed from their world. The skull on the building in Kamino Ward was still there. The city council had tried to have it removed 4 times now. 4 times it reappeared overnight. Fresh paint, same skull, same 7 words beneath it. Not the hero we wanted, the one we needed. Someone had added a line underneath. New paint, different handwriting, smaller letters, 1 batch, 2 batch, penny and dime. Nobody knew what it meant. The media speculated, analysts theorized, comment sections debated. Nobody got it right. Because nobody knew about a woman named Inko Midoriya who used to read her son a nursery rhyme she'd made up herself about a rabbit who counted pennies, and who died on a sidewalk before she could finish saying it. That was his. That memory. That grief. It belonged to no one else. On the rooftop in Shizuoka, the siren wailed. Izuku Midoriya stepped off the edge, his boots hit the fire escape landing. He descended. The metal stairs rang under his weight. The alley rose to meet him. The city opened up around him. Sound and light and motion and the raw, churning energy of a world that never stopped turning. He reached the ground, turned east, moved. One batch, two batch, penny and dime. The skull vanished into the city. The siren stopped. And somewhere, in a neighborhood the heroes forgot, a family slept through the night because the darkness that had been coming for them never arrived. They would never know why. They would never know his name. They would wake up in the morning and go about their lives and never understand how close they'd come, or what had stood between them and the worst night of their lives. They would never know about the boy with green hair and a skull on his chest who walked through the dark on their behalf, bleeding, burning, carrying a war that would never end so that their world, imperfect, broken, beautiful in its stubborn refusal to stop turning, could keep going. They didn't need to know. The Punisher didn't do the work for gratitude, didn't do it for recognition, didn't do it for any of the reasons that the hero system understood. He did it because someone had to. And because the boy who loved Katsudan and hero notebooks and his mother's voice was still in there, locked in a room, behind a wall of ice and rage and 5 years of unimaginable violence, still breathing, still listening, still holding on, one batch, two batch, penny and dime.
Huge salute to the legends fueling this journey. Your support is the engine behind everything we do. Whether you're on the front lines or reaching for the stars, you make this possible. Pro heroes, the elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. Dark Eye, DI, Fire 05, Govs LNS. Symbol of peace. The pillars of the community. The titans who keep our foundation solid and the hype at an all-time high. Kelvin Bowman, Mr. Panda, AZ Atros, Dweller of the Deepest Depths, Lone Wolf, Damian Leon, Jacob Rops, Jan L., Christian Mullins, Bully Maguire Shadow, Neo Star Productions, Asael Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Suna Wind 631, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Akuma Noakami, Chris Talley, Remorsefuls, Blackvein, Joshua Hedrington, Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK Eater, Akeno Himejima, Corey Tokars, Jan, Devin Black, Crow, Dasher Games, Joe Bros, Ray Von Crimson River, Dante Alistar, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Howie 60, Ignatius, Albert. Hope of the universe. The ultimate guardians. Celestial tier supporters whose impact shines across the galaxy. Noroi Uzumaki Uchiha, Kishan, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Debs, LS Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, Shoot X50, Greg Green, James, Quan Yin Thompson, Juan, Zeno KJ. And that is the story of Izuku Midoriya, the boy the system failed, the weapon the world made, the Punisher. If this hit different, you already know what to do. Subscribe, drop a comment. Who was your favorite moment? Because this war is far from over.